Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Break the Rules. I'm your host, Lev Polyakov, and we are here today with Jake Broe. He's a former nuclear and missiles operations officer at the U.S. Air Force, and he's dedicated his time to bringing out all the important information about the war of aggression that Russia's doing against Ukraine, that it's been doing for how many has it been? Like 4 years now. It's almost 5 years, and you're doing a very important thing. And what I'm going to try to do is bring together people like yourself with others who are within this ecosystem who are starting to figure out what you've known for a very long time, which is how important it is to support Ukraine against this aggressor of, I would say, not even just Russia, but I would say Russia, China, Iran, North Korea on the side there, but all these powers who I personally see as being anti-Western. And what I've recently been seeing was this shift of people who are more on the right wing, more on the MAGA side, kind of like Laura Loomer, for instance, who you recently forgave in a reply tweet, that now finally she's seen the light when it comes to Ukraine. And I definitely want to talk about that with you, as well as what exactly has been going on recently in the war. How Ukraine has been doing incredibly well against Russia, how we recently had that destruction of the oil facility in Moscow, and we had that very mimetic picture of the lid being bumped open, although that's thanks to, if I'm not mistaken, Russian missiles that were the anti-air missiles that just happened to hit themselves. So, what are you going to do? It's like Russia's kind of like playing GTA in real life, from what I'm able to understand. But anyway, Jake, first question that I want to ask you before we get to either of those topics is why you and why Ukraine? And let's get it started. Make sure to hype this video, click the subscribe button, smash that like button, click the bell. All of that is very important for growth, as well as patreon.com/break the rules to become a patron today. Anyway, Jake, why you, why Ukraine? You've got the floor.
Hey, Lev, thanks for having me back on. I've told my origin story a couple times here, but it was never my intent to be, I don't like the term military blogger, but that's, I guess, what I've become. I had been serving in the Air Force for 6 years as a missileer, and I started a YouTube channel as a side hustle. And in the beginning, I was talking about finance and investing topics. I was focusing on military finance and related topics. Like I made videos about VA loans and the GI Bill and stuff like that. And the week that I separated from the Air Force officially was the same week that Russia invaded Ukraine. So this was February of 2022. I had a YouTube channel with about 80,000 subscribers. I had gotten out of the Air Force to do YouTube full time. And I made a one-off video because it was impacting the stock markets. I was just talking about how would Russia invading Ukraine affect the global economy. And this video got a lot of views. It got 3 times the normal amount of views. And oftentimes with YouTubers or content creators, the audience tells you to make the kind of content they want you to make. So I tried for a while, like alternating a couple months between talking about trading options, which is what I was making videos about at the time, and then talking about what was going on with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But within 4 months, my channel had doubled in size. I was at 160,000 subscribers, and more people were watching me for updates on the war. And I just assumed that it would be over quickly. I just assumed that Russia would back off, or maybe even Ukraine would surrender. I didn't know anything about Ukraine in the beginning, but the more I learned, the more I got invested and got committed. And I just told my older audience, I'll come back to you once the war is over, but I need to be making at least 3 videos a week giving these updates, because this is what people want. And initially, the mainstream media was covering the war every day. You could turn on CNN or whatever, and you could get updates. But after 6 months or a year, that kind of faded away as people moved on. But obviously, Russia and Ukraine never moved on. And I've been now committed to this cause and supporting Ukraine. And fighting Russian disinformation for 4.5 years, and I'm not stopping. Nobody is stopping until Russia is defeated.
But why specifically did Ukraine resonate with you so much as opposed to other wars and other conflicts around the world?
Because these people want to join us. They want to join the West. They want to reduce corruption. They want to adhere to international law. They want to respect human rights and human value, whereas the Russians don't value any of those things. So I do feel like there's a connection to me personally as an American citizen, giving Russia's interference in the 2016 election, the 2020 election, the 2024 election. As long as Putin remains in power and he keeps getting away with it, he's going to continue interfering in American politics. Doesn't take a lot of money, doesn't take a lot of bot accounts to move the conversation and highlight divisive issues to cause disorder and chaos in an American system. So if Ukraine can prevail, if Ukraine can defeat Russia, this greatly weakens the forces in America that I oppose, who are currently destroying our civil society and corrupting our democracy. So Russia and Ukraine, it's important, obviously, for the people of Ukraine, but it has a huger impact on the broader world. Russia has been infecting and infiltrating all Western democracies, through our practice of free speech and being open societies, whereas they're trying to block everything. They're trying to control and restrict everything. They live in a closed society, a closed system. And I just personally want to live in a world where more people live in freedom and people have more opportunities, because I think that's a peaceful and safer world. And once again, if Ukraine can win, this will weaken the forces here in the United States and forces across Europe politically that I oppose and I don't want to see succeed.
Now, in terms of the opposition of forces, when it comes to, let's say, something like the MAGA movement, which from what I understand you're not a big fan of, now that we have people like Laura Loomer who have come out in support of Ukraine, why do you think that is? Why do you think we're starting to see that kind of shift happen?
What is preventing there from being a clear alliance? You've got MAGA and then all of these right wing parties across Europe. Obviously, Viktor Orban, the current president of Poland, AFD, Reform, the Front, they're all allied together with Russia. MAGA, Russia, all these right wing parties across Europe, they're all working together. They're all on the same page. But the one thing that just, is a sand in the gears is Israel. Israel is the single divisive issue that nobody can agree on across the right wing conservative global forces. So Laura Loomer wants to oppose Russia because she's against Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, who no longer support Trump. They used to. And Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, people like Nick Fuentes, they oppose Israel. And I think Laura Loomer is Jewish, so she supports Israel. So Laura Loomer, and I don't think she's honestly that relevant. Like, she has name and face recognition, but what is her actual viewership to her daily broadcasts? It's not very great. But I think she still is in direct contact with Trump. Like, she can text him whenever she wants and get a response. So I think Israel is the key here, where nobody can agree. Are they for Israel, against Israel? Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes, that part of old MAGA, they're trying to come out against Israel. And I think Laura Loomer is saying, well, what side are we, Israel and the United States, on? And if they've already said that Russia is their main benefactor now, then I guess Laura Loomer is saying we're on Ukraine's side. We need to pick a side.
I'm not sure if it's necessarily as simple as that. When it comes to how they
It's definitely
define
not
people,
simple.
no, it's not. But when it comes to people like Tucker Carlson and Fuentes and Alexander Dugin, for instance, on the Russian side, for those who have been under a rock, Alexander Dugin is this very extreme individual who is kind of the I would say the advisor in a certain philosophical way to how Russia wants the West to see itself as the opposition to this Western, chauvinistic, imperialistic, whatever you want to call it. And you made a really good tweet recently about how Russia has been an empire for a pretty long time, and it's been very oppressive wherever it happened to go. And this is the kind of empire that Putin wants to bring back. But then comes the question of what exactly, if we take Israel out of the picture for a second, what exactly is the essence of people like Tucker Carlson and Alexander Dugin in relation to the West that people like Laura Loomer would oppose?
Well, I think Laura Loomer and people like Tucker Carlson or Alexander Dugin have more in common than they have differences, but they are fractured on very important issues that are relevant today, given Trump started an unnecessary war with Iran. Uh, but in general, they don't support democracy. They don't believe people should have free will or free choice to determine their leaders or their common laws. They believe in exceptional individuals who should be ruling over everybody. Like, they want Trump to be a king. They want him to be an unquestioned sovereign monarch who can just make things happen. I understand the appeal of authoritarianism, where the guy at the top just wants it to happen and he can make it happen. You don't have to worry about labor laws or environmental laws or consumer protection laws. I think most of these tech CEOs like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk have become fascist because they want to operate in the best and freest environment for them to do whatever they want. They hate these campaign election cycles in which they have to talk to these legislators who might have art degrees or, went to law school, which they think is for losers. Like, they look down on our elected representatives because they're poor and they're insignificant. This has nothing to do with values or ideology. It's just about creating an environment that is freest and most beneficial to them. So they want to weaken democracy. The Constitution leading with we, the people they believe are irrelevant. They will be acted upon. They will be told what to think and what to feel by these tech platforms and their algorithms.
Well, to be
As
clear,
soon
though,
as they
you're talking about the tech oligarchs right now, which I definitely see there being a potential for people like that to want to have as much control as possible. But my question specifically has to do with what people like Laura Loomer would see in people like Tucker Carlson and Alexander Dugin and Candace Owens. If we, for example, get rid of any references to Judaism or Israel, what exactly is the kind of society that people like Alexander Dugin and Tucker Carlson are opposed to? And on the inverse, what's the kind of society that they're actually looking as being based and traditional and having all of these rock solid values? What are the kind of societies that they're looking at right now, which, if I could give you a hint, these are the same kind of societies that the Soviet Union was brainwashing a lot of intellectuals in college with arts degrees into believing are actually very virtuous societies and going against, this evil Western imperialism. You kind of see where I'm going with this, right? Where
it's all BS. There are no virtuous societies. It's all window dressing. When you talk about Russia being a land of traditional values, a Christian conservative society, no, it's not. When you look at the HIV infection rates, when you look at the drug use, the divorce rate, the abysmal church attendance, there's nothing about Russia that screams classical traditional conservative society.
sure,
It's just about brute power. It's about making the rich as possible and as powerful as possible. And these social media influencers, even Alexander Dugin, they just want to be the bishops, the knights and the rooks of this game. They don't care about the pawns. They know they're never going to be the king or the queen. They just want an elevated position, a prestigious position, and they want to have influence and effect on the world, on the discussion.
I'll give you this.
That's all
I'll
it
give
is.
you this
There,
example.
there is no mythical golden society that we're ever going to return to. It never existed. It's an illusion that has been sold to people so that the rich can just consolidate more power.
But do you see there being a, there's that term horseshoe theory. Do you see there being a meeting point between the people who are rallying around with the Palestinian flags, as well as sometimes the flags of the IRGC, and people like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Alexander Dugin. Because, to not be vague about it, there has been an exceptional bridge built between these two forces. And people who are from the MAGA side would refer to this as third worldism. And I don't know if you're familiar with that term or what exactly this entails.
For people on the left who are chanting from the river to the sea and free Palestine, I just can't take these people serious. I do think Israel is guilty of serious war crimes and crimes against humanity, but I also acknowledge that they're a democracy in an impossible situation. I do believe that if the United States was not protecting and defending Israel, Israel would eventually be wiped off the map by some Islamic force. Given how populous the Islamic world is and Israel is completely surrounded, there's just nothing Israel can do to talk to these people and uh, convince them to allow them to stay when that is the heart of the Muslim and the Arab world. And I think Jerusalem is supposed to be the third most holiest site in Islam. And they don't believe in their birthrights, that this land was guaranteed to them by God, because these are all Abrahamic religions. So the land was also promised to the people who adhere to the Muslim faith. I don't care about this dispute. As a non-practitioner living in the United States, why is this the number one priority of my government in every administration? And I know the answer, but what was your question again?
My
This
question,
is I know we don't want to talk about Israel. You want to talk about Russia, but I'm saying that this is what is dividing all of these people from being on the same page, because they all want fascism in America. They all want Trump to be empowered as an autocratic ruler with unquestioning. They don't care about the courts. They don't care about Congress. They don't care about elections. They just want power.
as far as being able to steelman where some of these people are coming from, because if it's not just power for the sake of, well, I have a lot of investment in, Peter Thiel's company, so I want more power for that reason. If it's actually something that they see as being an existential threat, I can give you this example. All right. So in Queens, you have the Al Khaway Center. The Al Khaway Center is not just Muslim, it's a sister center of the one in Qom, Iran, QOM. This is a 12er Shiite Islamic center. And the 12er Shiite religion / political ideology is something that is birds of a feather with the IRGC government. And the fact that nobody bats an eye that we have a place like this in Queens that's associated with the Islamic Revolutionary Government in Iran, to me, that's very disturbing. And I think that that's become very disturbing to a lot of people who are more on the right than myself. And when we're talking about this third worldism, what they're seeing when it comes to hatred for Ukraine and hatred for Israel and hatred for America, the West, whatever, goes hand in hand with love and affection for Islam, for the Islamic Revolutionary Government in Iran, for Russia, for China, for Palestine, for Gaza, for Hamas. Are you seeing a pattern over here where on the one hand, we have the Western countries, America, the European countries, Poland, Ukraine, Japan, Japan, even though it's on the East, it's Western in terms of, how they go about life. Meanwhile, we have these other countries that are a lot more traditional, if you will, a lot more, family values and the husband and the wife and yada, 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 but having to live under these very strict rules of Sharia law in the case of Islamic countries. And you have people like Tucker Carlson that are praising this kind of system and likewise are praising Russia for having these family values. And this is something that has become very apparent to a lot of people who are within MAGA, that these people who before we thought were traditional, these are awful people that are supporting despotic governments whose societies are unequal to and are far below Western society. And they're looking at Ukraine and they're saying, wait a minute, Ukraine is not like Russia in the sense that Ukraine, historically, as you know, part of it has been in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. But even more importantly, the Ukrainian people themselves, from what I understand, they've never been under this kind of serfdom that unfortunately a lot of Russian people were under for several centuries, under the Mongols, and after that they were under the pretty European leadership as far as the aristocrats, as far as the Tsar and his family were, they were relatives of the European royal family. And for all this time, these unfortunate Russian people have been used to this kind of mentality where I want to punish those that are lower than me, and I will praise those that are above me, like some kind of dictator, like a Joseph Stalin or Vladimir Putin or whatever. You get what I'm saying, right? So that mentality, this top-down mentality, you think that like the MAGA people would appreciate that, but at least what I've been seeing is that a lot of them have been looking at that mentality as being actually poisonous and antithetical to the principles of the founding fathers, which is why if we're talking about even issues like immigration or, Islam and things like that, they are seeing that kind of a top-down third world mentality that's shared between the Russians and the Hamas people and the IRGC Iranian people and so on and so forth as being something that we need to excise out of the Western world altogether. And this may be a point that, I don't know if you've heard that argument before, but I think it's definitely something that if you haven't heard of it, you need to become aware of it.
So, what you're describing are social caste systems, and in almost every human civilization, culture, society throughout history, we've always had hierarchies. People have been born unequal. And if you're born to the right parents with the right last name or whatever, you get preferential treatment. And that's how it is in every authoritarian society. North Korea being the purest example, where the population of Pyongyang is almost entirely populated by the descendants of Kim Il sung. So anybody, Kim Il sung and his ruling elites, anybody that he associated with during Japanese occupation and then the Korean War, if you were not part of one of those families, you don't get to live in the capital city. You don't get to have electricity or running water. So it's the same in China and in Russia and Iran. If you're born with the right name or the right lineage, bloodline, whatever, you are more equal than the others. And in democracies, we try to end that. We want to create meritocracies. We want merit-based systems in which the best and the brightest, regardless of your ethnicity or background or lineage or whatever, you have a fair shot in society. You have equal protection under the law. Like, this is a radical idea that was basically invented in the last 200 years. It slowly grew in popularity, but once a society becomes open and free, they don't want to go back to the caste system. But in the new system that we've created in liberal Western democracies, there are losers. The losers being the proud families with lineages, going back 7 generations, and you had the wealth and status, power, protection. So going back to the beginning of your question, you talked about this mosque in New York City, and my response, and this should be the response of every American, is I don't care. As long as they're not breaking any laws or harming anyone, their radical version of whatever religious beliefs they have, it's the same in compounds in Texas and compounds in Utah with fundamentalist Christian sects that oppress women and children and make them live very restrictive lives. This is just human nature. It can exist everywhere. So to single out just Iran or Shia Islam or whatever, you might not like it, but as long as they're not breaking the law, they have free association, freedom to believe whatever they want. That's the American gift that we all get to enjoy. So once again, you keep saying, why does Tucker Carlson promote this? And he's just trying to destroy Western liberal democracy. He doesn't want free and open societies. He believes, and all these other right-wing influencers believe, if they can close the society and consolidate power, they'll be, the generals in this new order or lineage or administration. It could just be for money. They're just grifting and they know if they sell this narrative, they can make a lot of money. But they also believe that whatever future they're helping to create, in which we don't have free and open societies anymore, they'll be the most privileged and benefit the most from having a closed society.
But to be fair, you're talking about the motivation that neither you or I know of people like Tucker Carlson, when we could just skip that altogether and talk about the people who resonate with what Tucker Carlson is talking about. Because a lot of those people have been, supporters of, from the river to the sea and all of that stuff. All of a sudden they're finding like, hey, Tucker Carlson's our guy. And, so is Alexander Dugin and Candace Owens and all of that. And these are the same people who are professors in these universities where I would not say that they believe in meritocracy at all. They believe in equity. They believe that if people are not completely equal in all ways, then there has to be something inherently wrong, and that needs to be corrected. Which means, for example, like it started with de Blasio in New York City. He started to get rid of those, or at least attempted to get rid of those special tests to find out if there's gifted children out there. Because how is that fair? How is that fair that one child is more gifted than another one? They should all be equal. So to me, that is the same Soviet Union, Russian communist tripe that a lot of leftists here in the United States have fallen for back in the 60s and the 70s, and even before, like in the 1940s, when you had these Stalinist agents that were influencing a lot of the intellectuals here into embracing Stalinism. This is the same communist tripe that's been influencing people today in the United States to embrace this kind of a third worldist mindset where, all of these precious people in the Middle East and Africa, like they should become a part of European society and not conform to European society. No, European society, Western civilization, it should conform to their idea of what culture should be. And you're right, like as long as it's within the law, it's fine. But at a certain point, how long should we wait until we have breakaway societies that we have started to see in places like England, for instance, where people do operate under their own little system of Sharia law, these no-go zones? My friends have been there. A friend of mine got beat up when he went to one of these places. I don't want to see this kind of thing here, but you could say, well, they're following the law. Okay, at what point does following the law bring us into a kind of cultural clash where the kind of values that the Ukrainians are trying to prevent being brought onto them by Russia are being brought on by the people who have come into Europe and into the United States?
I'll be upfront in that I believed forced equity is tyranny. You cannot make people equal in a society, but everyone under the law, respected by the government, has to be treated equally. You cannot have different laws for different people based on their last name or how wealthy they are. That's the kind of system that I'm going to oppose. Uh, your question about a clash in culture, I don't believe these people, once again, we're talking about the big names, the people who have millions of followers. They don't actually believe in this traditional family value or conservatism.
Forget what they believe. I don't care.
If they did, they wouldn't be supporting people like Trump, who's had 5 kids with 3 different women.
You're talking about what Tucker believes. I don't care what Tucker believes. I care about what the hordes of people that are listening to Tucker believe. And this point that my friend Didier brings up, I think it's important. What does Jake think of Popper's paradox of tolerance? If you want an open society, importing intolerance doesn't seem to be a good strategy.
Yeah, I agree. I think for people who come here with their beliefs or traditions from their old country, there's examples. Muslim families will come here, and then a woman is told she has to cover up wherever she goes. To the grocery store. That's not the law. And we've had countries like France that have banned hijabs. Women cannot be forced by their brothers, fathers, and husbands to wear them in public. If there was a clear answer here, this already would have been solved by one of these Western countries. So I don't have an answer for you. If you want to know what is my personal belief, uh, it's up for the family to decide how their members live. Once a woman in a traditional Muslim family, if they immigrate here, if she feels like she's being restricted or no longer able to live the life she wants to live, ideally she should be able to get away from her family and start over and free associate with anyone she wants, move anywhere in America if she immigrated here. But if she chooses to live that way, that's her cultural beliefs and she accepted it. We all have rules for each other on social systems and levels. Within families, people impose restrictions on each other that are not the law, and people don't have to follow them, but they choose to not be shunned or isolated from the family or the unit. So yeah, I don't know if I have a good answer for you. I mean, I don't think we can force these people who come here to be like us. But what makes America so great is that within 2 or 3 generations, you're just American. Whatever your parents brought with them or grandparents brought with them as far as cultural beliefs. My grandfather is an immigrant from the Netherlands, and my father was more Dutch than I am, which I don't really consider myself Dutch at all because it just fades over time. You should be taken in by American culture and American values, and then you should conform to what gets you farthest in the society. That's what normal people do.
Well, what gets you farthest in the society in which way? Because with the founding fathers, for instance, they were very much not in favor of factions. They didn't like the idea that people who come here would be clannish and not embrace a more, let's say, platonic idea of a civic nationalism, which is what they were after. And, like people back then who had the ability to participate in democracy, they had to have a certain level of intellectual upbringing. Like it was expected that these people would be reading Cicero and like the Greek and Roman classics and all that good stuff, right? So that is a very high bar, which I would encourage anybody to live up to. But I wouldn't want it to be the kind of experiment where people come over here and it's the is ought fallacy, where they ought to embrace those values and they ought to live in that way, but the is unfortunately is not that. The is, there were videos recently of people from India who were all taking up the wheelchairs in the airport, one after the other. And I really doubt that all of those people were handicapped. That would be extraordinary. And when I see something like that, I'm thinking, okay, that is very, very far from the kind of golden civic nationalism that we should encourage, right? Because people should have a sense of guilt about making use of that kind of technology if they themselves are not handicapped in some kind of way, right? Because that's very unfair to the people who actually are. And the question is, how do we get from people who don't have that within them to people who do have that within them? I would say let's start before they even cross the border, before they even get to the United States, so that once people, regardless of the color of their skin, once people are able to be shown to have those kind of qualities, then no problem, welcome on board, welcome aboard. But before that, why? Why do we need to bring in people who are not going to have those kind of qualities? Like you're talking about, well, the second generation, third generation. I don't know. That's kind of a risk because there's nothing that I'm seeing right now in the United States or the Western world that leads me to believe that these Muslim migrants are all of a sudden going to embrace European values, especially when at home it's very much, the same kind of strictures that they had to abide by back in the old country. What is it, just because of some kind of, yeah, have you ever heard of the magical soil theory or magical dirt theory? You can
No.
imagine what that is though, right? Like when they say magical dirt, right? It's as if you step onto the dirt, all of a sudden that magically turns you into the citizen of the place on whose dirt you stepped on. And obviously things are
So
a lot more complicated than that.
there's more than 300 million people in the United States, and 100 million people are either immigrants themselves or the first generation children of immigrants, including myself, including everybody in my family. And with every wave of immigrants that have come into this country, there's been racism, xenophobia, hatred towards the Scots Irish, towards the Italians, towards the Poles, towards the Irish. And it's always these people will never assimilate, these people will never adapt, but time always adapts them. And that's just not the answer that people want today, because people are, focused on themselves in the moment today, saying, this is my life for the next 30, 40 years. I don't want to tolerate or be neighbors with these people. But that's the American story. That's been the American story for 200 plus years, and that waves of immigrants just keep coming in. And your question is, why do we need them? Why do we need immigrants? Well, one, there is a pressing issue in declining birth rates and aging populations. And if you want economies to grow, you need people. And I'm just convinced that we're all one species on this planet. The only thing that separates us is culture. And if you don't like the culture of Iran or the culture of Palestine or the culture of Nigeria or Lagos or wherever, but those people are here, then you need to have a better culture. You need to have a stronger culture. I don't think there is any deliberate effort. Well, I mean, everything that Trump's doing with trying to create a unified American culture or forcing it on people is not going well. When you have cage fighters on the White House lawn screaming, Michelle Obama is a man, I don't know how many people from, the global South are going to say, I want to be a part of that culture. I want to
that's
assimilate.
actually what they love. I completely disagree with you there, because that's the kind of bread and circus stuff that a lot of the third world people are very much into, because it's very exciting.
Racism and sexism.
Oh,
Is that what you're
100%. No. Listen, dude, here's the
You
thing.
could be.
I'm an immigrant. I came here from Russia. I'm an immigrant. I had the immigrant experience of not speaking the language, learning the language, all of that. I have zero guilt about anything having to do with me being like a white guy or whatever. Zero. I really don't care. Which means that when it comes to judging people, I judge people according to how they act and what their culture is. I think we can all agree some cultures are better than other cultures. Some cultures are really bad. Some cultures we don't want to have in the United States based on how parents raise their kids. Do they beat their kids up more? Do they raise them in certain ways as to make them, be assholes when they grow up? There are cultures that are more like that. And
But that was American culture
it does
40
not in any way
years
mean
ago.
that there's a skin color issue there. Not at all. People of any place of origin have the potential to become Americans. I completely agree with you there. But if we're talking about the culture, this is why I want to circle back to Russia over here. If we're talking about the culture of those people, if it's one which is very similar to this top down mentality of Russians who have grown up in this kind of toxic environment of, always loving the Russian propaganda TV and praising Vladimir Putin, and at the same time, pushing down the people that are below them. We don't want that kind of culture here. And I think that's what a lot of the MAGA people are starting to realize when they're looking at who the people are that people like Tucker Carlson and Alexander Dugin are praising. Same thing with, who are people like Nick Fuentes praising, or who are people like Andrew Tate praising. You know what I mean? It's all the same stuff. It's this mix of traditionalism as they see it and this Rousseauian noble savage, where they're looking at people who are not from advanced cultures and are a little bit more rough around the edges, and they're kind of seeing something cool about it. Something like, oh, these people don't care. They just want to be like manly men and do all this kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of where a lot of this stuff is coming from. And it's very weird to me that there is such a separation right now between, let's say, your side, who supports Ukraine, and MAGA, who is starting to, at least that portion of MAGA, who is starting to support Ukraine, and what they're seeing with the third worldism. And what I believe there is a barrier between, let's say, maybe your side and recognizing that third worldism by itself as a problem.
So let me ask you, when was the last time you were in Russia? Like, how long ago?
When I was 4 years old, probably. But we still have people who have lived in Russia for some time after the fact that we've been keeping in contact with. Why do you ask?
Do you think Russia today in 2026 basically has a caste system where if you are white and you have ginger hair and blue eyes, you just are treated better and given more opportunities than somebody with darker skin or maybe who's Muslim?
No, not at all. Muslims in Russia, like in Moscow and St. Petersburg, they're able to have their way with Russian women, and they get let go because the Muslims, specifically like the Chechens, are being used by the government of Vladimir Putin as a kind of enforcement tool. In fact, if you look at videos from within Moscow, you would see thousands of Muslims who are praying to Mecca out in the streets. And notice that they don't really do that in Muslim countries. They do that in, well, I guess in Russia. I was about to say in Western countries, but I don't consider Russia to be a Western country at all. So here is just like a quick example video. Here you could see like all these Muslims over here who are marching through Russia, chanting Allah Akbar. So as far as who is in control of places like Russia, I would very much say that it is people who are of the Muslim persuasion much more than what you were talking about with the white skin and the ginger hair.
Yeah, I guess I don't. I just really don't understand how their society operates then when they can promote this narrative that they're defending traditional conservative values, but maybe their brand of traditional conservatism is more aligned with the traditional family values of Islam. I don't understand. People like Jackson Hinkle who just repeat this stuff for every, like, how do you
Yeah.
live like that? How do you just wake up every morning and say, I'm going to make more pro Iranian or pro Hamas slop and post 22 times a day or whatever? I can't, I'll be honest, as a white guy that was born and raised in Wisconsin,
Hmm.
I don't understand how anyone can find that lifestyle appealing, where the man is expected to be the head of the family and like this authoritarian, strong figure who has to make every decision for his daughters and wives. And there's just so much hypocrisy and there's so much abuse. And,
Yet you were saying earlier that, well, they're following the law, so what are we gonna do? That's the real
yeah,
issue for me because but people
that's
figure
their
out
choice.
ways of abusing the law. That's the real problem here. Like, how do we manage to get ourselves out of that? That's the $1 million question. I agree, it's not easy. It's not an
Time.
easy question.
Time. If our open society and our democratic values are appealing enough, they should do what every other Western society once did. You think about what was life like in Imperial Japan before it
Mhm.
became a democracy. What was like in France 200 years ago. So what I don't want to be Eurocentric and say we're the best, but I do believe that if freedom and democracy are the best forms of human societies, then people eventually will gravitate towards them. And I'm sorry, but for people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, their brains have already calcified. What gives them comfort is what they've always known, what they grew up with. But once they have children, once they have grandchildren, I do believe they will assimilate and they will Americanize or liberalize or Westernize.
But why?
Why what?
Why would they assimilate? Why would they liberalize?
Because this is a better way to live your life, I believe, in that
Well,
you're
you
not.
believe, but that's the problem. Just like, let's say, people believe that Vladimir Putin is capable of being a reasonable human being, they project their own sense of justice onto these people. And what I'm afraid of is that, Jake, like, you're a very nice guy, you're very friendly, you're very forthright, and you have a set of ethics that you live your life by. I mean, this is why you're supporting Ukraine. It's an extremely important thing that you're doing right now, and I'm supporting Ukraine as well. But I think that you're attributing certain things that may make sense to you to people who consider those things to be weakness, who consider those
Correct.
things to be
Yeah,
shameful.
you are correct. The way I live my life in many ways, I'm sure is offensive and abhorrent to, Shia Muslims living in Iran.
But you know who it wouldn't be abhorrent towards? The Iranian young people who have been protesting and rallying for their future and who were destroyed by the IRGC. Those young people, you know what they did? They were burning down mosques. Okay, now that takes guts. They burned down mosques. I want those young Iranian people, if they want to come to the United States. In the future, after we have great trade relations with the Republic of Iran that's gotten rid of the IRGC. Those would be people who I'd say are closer to the West than so many of these dumb college students that are going to places like Columbia, who lived in absolute privilege and don't understand what it means to actually fight for liberty, just like the Ukrainians, by the way. You know what I mean? Like that idea of having enough responsibility in how you live your life, in how you react to other people, and how you don't misuse the facilities in the airport with the wheelchairs, you know? Like that sense of responsibility is something that is deserving of liberty. But those who are not responsible, you know, those who live in more of this kind of hive mind where they would steal the clothes off the back of their neighbor unless there was a law that would chop their hands off for doing that. You know what I mean? Like that's more of a shame-based society. I want more of a guilt-based society, as I think you do as well, right? Like people who would feel on the inside that they don't want to do these bad things. They don't want to, misuse the generous system that the United States and other Western countries have had. You know, we don't want people
Doesn't MAGA oppose all those people from coming to America? Like, isn't there a complete Muslim ban on visas or immigration from all these Muslim countries?
No, the Muslim
MAGA
ban
just doesn't want them in.
I wish the Muslim ban thing would have targeted a lot more countries, if I'm being honest, and it's not that at all. It was targeting certain countries that have to do with,
It was targeting poorer countries that didn't have Trump properties in them. You know, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, they're good.
They weren't targeting Pakistan, I believe, right? They weren't targeting India.
We have some kind of weird friendly relationship with Pakistan that I don't entirely understand. But as long as they have nuclear weapons, I want to have good relations with Pakistan. So I'll support it.
Yeah, but the problem with Pakistan is that you have these Pakistan students who burned down the U.S. embassy when the Ayatollah Khomeini was talking about.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. You're right. Our embassy was burned down there.
Yeah, you remember it was the 1980 something siege of Mecca, which was done by this radical Wahhabi guy named Juhayman, who was, by the way, friends with Biz Baz, who was this blind cleric in Saudi Arabia, who was like well regarded. So again, it's like, I don't like this hive mind of Pakistani students that burn down the U.S. embassy when they get some, game of telephone from the Ayatollah Khomeini telling them that it's like American agents that have taken over Mecca. I don't want those kind of people in the country, and I don't think that makes me a bad guy. Right? I hope.
I just don't think they're coming in such large quantities where it matters to a certain degree. Like, I just feel like people focus on these individual stories when we are a nation of over 300 million. And we just don't hear about the good stories. We don't hear about the successes. When things go right, it doesn't go viral on social media. So I hate it when people hear about these anecdotal stories like the wheelchairs in the airport or whatever, and then they get upset. They get angry, and then they want to change the laws of the nation to solve one single issue that they heard about. So I just have to be very cautious when I hear stories like that, because you're not hearing the good stuff. And there's always blowback. There's always secondary effects when you try to change the law or make policies where the people who are benefiting or the people who are doing everything right, maybe those students that were rising up against the IRGC who want to come here, they can't come here now.
No, well, there's definitely a need to address these things in a careful way so that you don't end up creating problems. But
do you think Trump and MAGA has been careful in how they implement policy?
The only thing I would say there is that as far as the border itself, I believe, could be wrong, I believe it's a lot more secure now. This gentleman who I had on the show, he was a former U.S. Border Patrol captain. He was talking about the horrible human trafficking that was going on back when you had the CBP-1 app utilized by the drug cartels, where they had this kind of auction system. People all around the world can send in money in order to then get a VPN in northern Mexico. Then they would be flown down there, and all they had to do is present their little CBP-1 app thing on the phone, and off they went. And unfortunately, you had like little kids that were able to go through that system. Sometimes you had like 3-year-old girl who couldn't, she was completely unconscious, and she was brought through the system and then smuggled to some people who then completely lost, the people who were in charge of, knowing who she was going from and to who. They completely lost that girl, and they completely lost all these people who were going through the border, these kids. So to me, that is a horrible thing, and I'm happy that the border is secure, at least if we're talking about that. But in the broader scheme, if we're talking about, for example, let's see, I'm going to stop this one. And by the way, if you guys are enjoying the show, make sure to smash that like button, smash that subscribe button. So here, I mean before I am, this is an account that I follow, and she lives in New York City, and here she is capturing a rally. I believe this was a Shiite rally that was done over here with these various, Islamic flags and this flag full of blood and things like that. And it's like, I don't want this, man. And I understand you're talking about the law and we have to be extremely careful, but this is why I want to do whatever can be done in order for these things to be addressed in a lawful and legal way with respect to the kind of ideals that the founding fathers wanted to promote. And if we're like, we're spending so much time over here talking about New York City and Islam and all this stuff, if we focus back to Ukraine and Russia, where I see the bridge being able to be built is specifically between the people who are fighting for their liberty in Ukraine, who want to have the kind of life that they see in the West, that they see in the ideal sense of America. The America that you could say, well, it never really existed, but, I'm sure in certain portions it did. At least there's like the platonic idea of America that we're all striving towards, right? So the Ukrainians, they're striving towards that, while at the same time, they're rejecting these Russian orcs that are destroying orphanages and hospitals. And if you notice, I mean, I don't need to tell you who are the targets of Ukrainian bombs mostly. It's oil refineries. It's whatever stops the Russian war machine. Who are the targets of Russians? Little children. Children being kidnapped. Hospitals. Residential areas. Civilians. And I'm sorry, but I see a direct link, as do people like Laura Loomer, between the people with these IRGC flags, with the Gaza Hamas flags, and these Russian orcs. It's the same mentality. It has nothing to do with skin colors. Russians are white. Those people are brown. Doesn't matter. What it does have to do with is this very low vibration mentality that the Ukrainians are rejecting, and that a lot of people on the right in the United States are also rejecting. And what they're afraid of, some of them, at least, okay, I'm not going to speak for them. What I'm afraid of is that if you don't like Trump, just wait until we have a scenario where all the responsible pillars of the community type people who are honorable, who believe in justice, who believe in the American way, who believe in the law, refuse to do anything at all about the problems I was talking about in terms of these third worldist type of societies that are in Europe, that are in the United States. Refuse to do anything about it, as long as they're following the law. Just wait until the people who do something about it, they're going to make Trump look like a Boy Scout. And that's what I'm afraid of.
So let's actually rewind and talk about the fate of Ukraine and what Ukraine is actually fighting for. Because, obviously I want to believe Ukraine is fighting for democracy, human rights, equality under the law. But that's not actually what they're fighting for. They're fighting for their own economic interests. And what they view is just the other side of the border. They share a border with Hungary, Slovakia, even Romania and Poland. And if
Hmm.
you go back to the breakup of the Soviet Union, the Berlin Wall coming down, 1992, Ukraine and Poland were roughly equal in economic size and value. And Poland got into NATO. Poland got into the EU. Poland reformed and became a real democracy. And the Polish economy is the miracle of Europe. Poland, I've never visited there myself, but I hear it's a fantastic place to visit. And that's what Ukrainians want, given the common language history of Ukraine's actual language and the Polish language. There's a lot of cultural ties. Even obviously, Lviv used to be a Polish city. So, what Ukrainians are fighting for is not, American values or traditional liberal values. They just want a better life for themselves and their kids. And if Russia could actually offer that to them under conservative, Eastern Orthodox, traditional, whatever values, if that was the path that could make them richer, they would be closer to Russia. They would surrender their sovereignty and join Russia today if it actually would improve their lives. But it won't, because Russia is a closed society based on corruption, gangsterism, oligarchy, and Ukraine is fighting for their own economic self interest, a better life for their kids and grandkids. They want to be a member of the EU. They want the security guarantees of NATO. That's what they're fighting for. So I don't know how to connect this to the issue that you seem focused on here. With first of all, New York is just not what America is, because it is a city of immigrants, and you're going to have hundreds of languages being spoken in every religion, whatever. But you can't just start blocking or banning people for what they believe, because as soon as the government starts doing that, it's the next group that's going to get on the chopping block that we don't like. And then it's the next group, it's the Scientologists, it's the Mormons, it's whoever. You
No,
can't go down
there
that
is a
path.
way it could be done. There is a way it could be done where if you look at a system like Islam, not as a religion, because it's not just a religion, it's also a political system. It has its own way of operating a government, and it is completely incompatible with the United States or the European systems when it comes to the Bill of Rights and all that good stuff. It's just like a separate competing government system. Like imagine if there was the religion of Nazism, and their god is Adolf Hitler, and they worship Adolf Hitler. They're facing the Reichstag every 5 times a day, right? So imagine that kind of a political system whose end goal is to upend whatever system they happen to be living in, and eventually have Dar al Nazi, or in the case of Islam, Dar al Islam, House of Islam, as opposed to Dar al Harb, House of War, which is their name for any territory they're currently in, which has not converted to Islam, which is not run by an Islamic government, which does not have a system of fiqh, which is Islamic law that's been passed down, since the Middle Ages, in the system of master to disciple. So they don't have any compatibility, legally speaking, with a Western system. So forget about revealed religion, forget about the afterlife, any of this stuff. Just from a purely practical point of view, Islam is a political system. And I don't think there is a possibility of having a competing political system whose aim is to upend the current political system in the long term.
I don't know. Just over my lifetime, I wish I had a solution here for you, Lev. I'm still sticking to my position that people who immigrate here or move here from Muslim countries, they're fixed in their ways, similar to all immigrants who have come to America. But over time, if we have the better system, if we have the better values, they'll just conform.
Because that's what you would do.
Islam will reform eventually. Like, how do we
No, it can't reform because it's the final word. That's the big difference here, is that the way that Islam is written, there can be no other text after Islam. This is the final say. It is absolutely perfect. It is absolutely timeless. So, you could try to reform that, but you're going to be going against a
I
legal
think we need to be
system.
careful talking about 1.7 billion people because the average Muslim living in Morocco is dramatically different than Indonesia or Bangladesh. Uh, I
No,
just
but their
can't.
legal systems are still the same unless you're talking about, let's say, Sunni versus Shia, who do differ in terms of their eschatology. So, for example, the Shia, who are in Iran, their idea of the end of the world has to do with the coming of the 12th hidden imam, where they have that's why they're called the Twelvers, because there are supposed to be 12 imams that are supposed to come around. And once the 12th comes, that's the end of the world scenario. Then Jesus comes back, and yada yada yada. So it's an interesting thing they got going there. But as far as the laws specifically, you would have Hanabi, Hanafi, or Hanbali, Jafari, different systems of Islamic law in different countries. But as far as how they deal with things like warfare, how you bring in how, for example, you would be able to turn somebody who is a Christian or a Jew who disrespected you into a prisoner of war. Because legally speaking, if I'm not wrong about this, you as a man of the book, would be a second class citizen under the dhimmi system in a Muslim government. And if you disrespect a Muslim, you would be branded as a prisoner of war, and they could do whatever they want with you. So again, these are legalistic things that, yeah, like the average Muslim may not think about it. The average Muslim may go out and drink, but I'm just talking about overall systems that have a mimetic control over people's lives. And it may be a little bit buried underneath. It may not be something that a lot of people are aware of, but so long as it's like a living system, because for me, like Christianity, during the time of the founding fathers, even Christianity, at least for people in that upper crust, it wasn't taken that seriously. In fact, like the many of the founding fathers themselves were deists, right? They didn't even believe in the miracles of Jesus Christ or any of this kind of stuff. They believed that there was some creator out there who didn't really participate that much in the everyday of
The
reality.
clockmaker.
Exactly, the clockmaker. So already, like back then in the 1700s, you had people that were making fun of all these superstitious things. But if you have people, and I'm not even just going to pick on Islam over here, if you just have people who have this very primitive understanding of reality where they need to abide by this system of laws, or else there's going to be a lot of bad things happening. That is not a system that I find to be similar to whether or not they're yearning for it, to the Ukrainian people. Because you do have a good point about the Ukrainian economic interests, where I'm sure that is something that is much more in people's minds than, we got to be like the founding fathers of the United States. I agree with you there. But
It,
the
yeah,
difference, though, real quick, the difference is that I think that the Ukrainian people, because of the kind of culture that they've already had, are much more inclined to embrace the virtues that you yourself are admiring.
something that I find interesting is here in the United States, we do the national census every 10 years. So it happened in 1990, 2000, 2010. And going all the way back to the first census in 1780 or 1790 or whatever, what percent of the American population identified as Christian? And it's
Mhm.
been 88, 89, 91, 92, 92% consistently for 200 years. And then in 1990, went down to like 87, 2000, 85, 2010, 78, 2020. It just keeps dropping. So there's obviously something changing in our culture, our society. And I have to argue that potentially the cause is the internet and technology. And I remember, I'm old enough to remember culturally what it was like in the United States in the 1980s and 90s, where people had to go to church to have some kind of connection with their community, to be able to meet people and talk to people and interact. You had to go to church service to find people. And as soon as we got alternate ways of socializing and meeting up and finding new people. Church attendance dropped, religious participation dropped. And don't you think that exact same system will play out in Muslim countries as they digitize and they get more connected and they have smartphones? Like, do you think what happened to us and what happened to our traditional conservative religious societies? Like, I remember being a kid in the 90s and talking about divorce and how shameful it was if your parents were divorced, and here we are 30 years later and nobody cares. In fact, if you still have two parents that are married and who love each other, like, that's the exception. Like, that's a really rare thing that I find, especially amongst people in my age bracket. I just think what's happening to us over the last 30 years is going to happen to the Muslim world. Technology is technology and people are people. And yeah, Islam might be pretty entrenched in these societies and cultures, but they're going to change because they've changed just in the last century. You look at pictures and videos of how it was in Iran in the 1950s and 60s prior to the Islamic Republic. How was that version of Islam permittable even 70 years ago? So
I'll tell you
obviously,
exactly why. Because in Iran, the Iranian people have lived for thousands of years under a culture which I would say is equal to, if not in certain ways better, than the culture that brought us Plato, Aristotle, etc., before Islam ever came about. And this is a very important point because the Iranian people themselves, I think the reason why we're seeing all these young people that are ready to give their lives up for a better future is because even if they may not be, like historically studied on all these various things, I do believe that the culture that they've inherited from all of those thousands of years still resonates within them. And as an example, if we're talking about the conquering of Iran by, I believe it was after Abu Bakr, it was Omar. I believe Omar was the first one who went into Iran and conquered it. Even after Iran became Islamic, the people who were the scientists and the philosophers, people talk about the Islamic Golden Age. They were Iranians who, if I'm not mistaken, they rejected Islam. They thought that Islam was ridiculous, but it was something that allowed them to be free of what was before a much more authoritarian, traditionalist type of Zoroastrianism, which was the case right before the Muslims invaded. So this was during the period of the Sasanian Empire, back when they had certain revolutionaries come and go, like they had, for example, Mazdak and Mani. Mani, from the word Manichaeism, if you're familiar with that. And Mazdak, he was like a proto-socialist guy who wanted everybody to sleep with everybody else. And that way you have kind of like almost an ancient Sparta. You have like children that don't really have any specific, nuclear families. And that guy ended up being brought to where his followers were, who are now dead and buried with their legs sticking up. This was when you had the resurgence of Zoroastrianism in Iran. Again, this is all before Islam came about, but it was now this very authoritarian type of Zoroastrianism, which was not good for a lot of the thinkers because Zoroastrianism still had a lot of components that the thinkers could look at and say like, oh, I kind of agree with this. But then when Islam came about, at least the theory here is that the reason why you had a lot of these brilliant people is that they couldn't rely on the security blanket of Zoroastrianism. That was out the window. And now, because Islam came about, they were able to reject all religion entirely and become much more free thinking. And that is why I believe that we had this Iranian Renaissance during the Middle Ages, despite Islam, still being within that area, and why I think a lot of these young Iranian people have been rising up. So I don't know what that would tell you as far as where the mentality of Muslims is, because I wouldn't consider Iranians to, at least those who have inherited that kind of inner fire, to have anything to do with Islam. They're the enemies of Islam as far as I'm concerned.
I don't know. I mean, I read the book Lost Enlightenments by Starr, talking about the history of Central Asia. This includes Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, also Iran. And yeah, when Europe was experiencing the Dark Ages, a lot of our historical texts and scientific thinking survived and flourished in the Islamic world for until Europe got its act together and achieved the Renaissance, I guess. But
Hmm.
I still think once again culture and religion evolves and changes over time, and I think there's so much happening technologically to accelerate the change of culture and society that we don't know what the final form of Islam will be. And I just don't think the way it currently exists is how it's going to remain frozen in time from now until eternity. Like I think there's going to be continuous evolution and changes.
It
And
hasn't
I think
changed so far at all. From the beginning of Islam to now, it's remained the same. So I don't see why it would change.
I'm pretty sure there's been some changes
Well,
as
no, if
far
we're
as
talking,
like
no,
cultural
no, no.
practices and traditions.
There's been movements towards more fundamentalist approaches, like with the Wahhabis, for instance. And then there has been less of an emphasis on Islam as far as MBS, for example, in Saudi Arabia, right? Where all of a sudden women are able to take, their hijabs off and things like that. And that's all good. But the problem is that it seems like it's not a reform of Islam as far as the legal strictures, because you can't change those. It would be one thing if there was a way to change the actual legal codes that are enshrined in the Quran and the Hadiths and so on and so forth in these religious texts. But we're just talking about certain oil rich Muslim leaders who happen to kind of look the other way and, oh, we could have drinks, we could have partying, and it's all right, it's all good, And we have that in England too, right? Like we have young people who live in London who also drink and do drugs and do all this stuff. But at the same time, they are still parts of these no-go zone gang culture things as well. So it's like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too, but neither of the cakes that they're attempting to have and eat have anything to do with the kind of culture that, let's say, again, we keep going to Islam, which is partly my fault, but if we focus on Ukraine and Russia, finally, then if we're talking about the kind of culture that the Ukrainians have, that the Russians do not, that is something where I think that if we were to embrace more of that in the United States, and if we were to focus on that as being the reason why we should help Ukraine, then we're going to see a lot of changes. Because so far, I'm sorry to say, Jake, but I think a lot of the reasons why there has been a lot of pushback against supporting Ukraine, I mean, partly is this unfortunate high school mentality with Trump, where he saw that, well, the Ukrainians were on Biden's side, so I'm going to be against Ukraine. I'm not a big fan of that at all. But the other part is that if you just consider, just for a second, that I may have a certain point about these cultural clashes, the people who are seeing those cultural clashes today on the right look at Ukraine and Ukrainians as being the antithesis of this, as being people who are European in culture, who would be no different than you or I as far as how they would conduct themselves in the United States or in Europe. I mean, that's pretty evident. I don't think we would have problems with Ukrainian immigrants coming over to the United States in terms of how they would assimilate. And at the same time, they're seeing people like Tucker Carlson and Alexander Dugin and what's his name, Jackson Hinkle, all these people praising Islam, pointing the finger up in the air and all this kind of stuff, and embracing this very regressive ideology, which you see being in MAGA. And I'm not saying that it isn't in MAGA either. Like, I'm sure, that tradness is also there. But at the same time, when it gets to that level of low vibration, of the kind that Jackson Hinkle and Tucker Carlson espouse, if you imagine yourself in the mind of a MAGA guy, if just for a second, and you see Tucker praising Islam and praising, like the global South, third worldist values and all that kind of stuff, what would that make you think when it comes to Ukrainians? Because I think all of a sudden you would start questioning why you don't like Ukraine.
I don't really know because I've never lived in Ukraine, so I can't say what their culture was like going back. Let's say prior to 2014, prior to
Okay.
Crimea being invaded. But I imagine the perceptions of the average Ukrainian towards Russia was more positive and less hostile
Hmm.
prior to Putin seizing Crimea. And I think Ukraine right now is dramatically changing its culture because they have to. They're trying to survive. Russia is threatening their extinction. This is a cultural, linguistic, historical genocide occurring. So I think there's a lot of stuff, maybe LGBT issues in Ukraine, where people don't feel comfortable and they don't support it. But that's the way it is in Europe. So they have to conform, they have to change in order to eventually adapt and then be integrated in the European system. So in general, I think religion is being used as a weapon. Stalin called religion the opium of the masses and destroyed churches. Whereas as soon as Vladimir Putin got into power, he's like, no, 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 no. We need as many churches as we can. Putin has been building new Eastern Orthodox churches everywhere he can stick one
Hmm.
because it trains and teaches people to surrender to a higher power. I personally don't do that. I don't surrender myself to anyone, especially if I've never met them and I can't directly talk to them. Which is why Trump is so successful with evangelicals and people who are deeply religious in the United States, is because these people have been conditioned from birth to surrender to a higher power, which is why Trump loves the Christian community and loves getting pastors together and they all put their hands on his back. And he is the
Yeah.
Masonic figure for the entire right wing Christian movement. I don't think that's compatible with Islam, but it is it is the same idea. Surrender your free
Mm.
will, surrender your rights, surrender to a
There's
higher
well,
power,
there's
and all
level.
will be provided for
Yeah.
you and you will be protected and we will smite down and defeat our enemies, in this world and the next. I
There's
don't
levels of
live
this
by that
though.
bullshit, but a lot of people do, and I have to tolerate living in a
Yeah.
society with them.
But there's a gradient. I'll give you this example. I was at the Russian Turkish baths in New York City. Wonderful location, by the way. It's very historic. It was around since the late 1800s. And there was this guy in there who was of the homosexual persuasion who was talking very angrily about Christianity and talking very nicely about Islam. And from our conversation, what I got was that because he saw in his own life growing up, Christian household and all of that and being gay, that he must have encountered a lot of negativity from the people who are around him. But because of that, he saw himself as a victim. And likewise, because he saw Islam as being opposed to Christianity, he saw Islam and Muslims as also being victims, just like him. And then we have this whole, I'm sure you've heard of like the Queers for Palestine thing, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of crazy people out there with weird ideas, and
No, but
there's
it's
nothing
but
I
it's
can do
not
about it.
random. It's not crazy and weird in a sense that we can't define why it is the way it is. It's because the idea is you have an oppressor and the oppressed, and anything that's white and Christian and European is
Sure.
the oppressor, and everything that's the opposite of that. So you would, like
Well,
brown,
it's
Middle Eastern, Muslim, whatever, right? That would be the oppressed. And that's the
there's
mentality that unfortunately allows people like Tucker Carlson to gain a foothold in the minds of people that, I think are very much closing this gap between what you would consider to be extremist right and extremist left, where I see it as being so close together now, as far as this combination of both victimhood and traditionalism and all this kind of stuff. Where I don't know, it sounds like what I'm saying is new to yourself as far as that kind of connection between those two things. I don't know.
no, no. Russian propaganda has been incredibly effective, getting people in the global South or the third world to support them because they say you were oppressed, you're the victims. Those evil French, those evil British, those evil Americans have been having their boot on your throat for hundreds of years, exploiting you. Whereas we, the Russians, we've never been an empire. We've never engaged in colonialism. We are on your side to
Hmm.
be a counterweight, a bipolar world to knock back and check and stop, those French, British, and Americans from oppressing you. When, of course, Russia is an empire, it's the largest empire that has existed since the Mongols. And because the Russians are brutalizing and oppressing their neighbors, other Europeans that the global south does not identify with, they don't care. People in Nigeria, people in, uh, Southeast Asia, they don't care about white people killing white people because they don't identify with them. So it's staggering that, yeah, what you're describing, queers for Palestine or whatever, oppressed of the world people unite against our oppressors. Russia uses that narrative as a weapon to get a lot of people from Africa to volunteer and sign contracts to go fight and die for them in Ukraine when
Hmm.
it's nonsense. I mean, these are just crazy people who have been um, taken advantage of and manipulated, and they're working, in my opinion, against their own self-interests. But that's just the world we live in. It's
Absolutely.
shameful and chaotic.
And I'm sure you've seen the weaponized migration Russia's been doing for quite a while now, where they were bringing African migrants to the borders of countries like Finland, for instance.
Yeah, and Poland. So you
Hmm.
got double link fence, and they've got cameras and security guards, and yeah, they're deliberately trying to shove in as many refugees and migrants. They're exploiting European laws that allow for people to claim asylum if they think they're at risk of being killed. This is the same thing in the United States. And I'll just talk about the southern border really quick. If you don't like our asylum laws, then change the fucking laws. Like, we had a bill on the floor of the Senate in early 2024 to fund Border Patrol, hire new federal judges for immigration court cases. This was Langford in Oklahoma, Republican, who co sponsored the bill. It was going to pass, and Donald Trump said, don't pass it because he wanted the border broken. He wanted as many migrants flooding across the border as possible prior to his election. He wanted a problem not to be solved prior to the election. There's this famous interview with Mark Wayne Mullen, I think, who's now Trump's Homeland Security chief, who said, I was told if I voted for this, my political career would be destroyed, that I was not allowed to fix a problem prior to the election because Donald Trump wanted to run on that problem staying a problem. So yeah, I would say immigration is definitely weaponized, and it's weaponized by everybody to achieve their political goals.
Mhm. Well, again, if we're talking about the motivations, I could agree that certain things like that would have played a role in Trump's mentality and mentality of the people that are around him. But if we're talking about the telos, I like that word telos. I like using it because it makes me seem sophisticated. But as far as what telos means specifically, because you could say it's like a final cause. So telos is a term used by the philosopher Aristotle to refer to the final cause of a natural organ or entity or of human art. The Greek word telos is the root of the modern term teleology, the study of purposiveness or of objects with a view to their aims, purposes, or intentions. That's a nice definition. So, as far as the telos of your average Trump supporter, I don't think there is a way that I could say it's, one or the other, where I'm sure people would want to live in a safer environment without the problems that they foresee, whether they're justified or not. But as far as going back to the very beginning of why certain MAGA people are looking at Ukraine as being a part of the West now and rejecting the third worldism, when it comes to the telos of how they want to live in their country, in America, and how they're seeing the Ukrainians, do you see there being a way, despite the problems that you have with MAGA, of bridging that gap in embracing what it actually means to be Western civilization, and in such a way, maybe, that you and other people like you could be the voice that prevents there from being the kind of dictatorship that you're very much concerned about certain people in MAGA wanting to embrace? Like, could we get the good teleology here of the kind of world that they want to live in and what they would see in the Ukrainian people as also being a part of that world? while getting rid of the parts that you don't like?
I appreciate the way you frame the question, but I just reject that MAGA is authoritarian. MAGA is fascist. MAGA does not believe in separations of powers or checks and balances or the Constitution anymore. Donald Trump is an all powerful authoritarian in which everyone must submit to him. And anybody who does not submit will be shunned and ostracized, bullied or harassed or whatever. Like,
So if we get rid of
there's no coherent ideology of MAGA aside from give Trump money, give Trump and his kids more money and more power to do whatever they want with, and don't ask questions. So MAGA is going to implode.
So we can get rid of all of what you said. Let's get rid of that. What do we have left in MAGA in terms of, if you ask your average MAGA voter and you tell them exactly what you told me right now, and then you say to them all this bad stuff that I just said to you, let's banish all of that stuff out of existence. It doesn't exist anymore. Let's live in a world where you respect limited power, okay? Where you respect our institutions. But then what else do you have with MAGA? Because MAGA wouldn't just be, well, Trump is the dictator and I'm going to do whatever he says. Because if Trump says, I don't know, we're going to convert everybody to Islam, I doubt the MAGA supporters would be into that, right? So if we get rid of all the authoritarian stuff that we don't like, I don't like it too. If we get rid of all of that, what do we have left with MAGA? As far
so you want Handmaid's Tale without, authoritarianism somehow? Like,
well, no, you're going to Handmaid's Tale right now. But if we're talking about something like the border, what is the teleology of the kind of country that? And again, it's difficult to judge people as a group if they have more diverse ways of looking at it. But in general, your average Trump supporter, right? If all of a sudden the average Trump supporter was to be convinced that, yes, dictatorship is horrible, I never want Trump to be a dictator, I never want anybody to have that much power because power corrupts, right? So you've talked to this Trump supporter, you guys have agreed on that. What else does the Trump supporter have in their minds of the kind of country that they want to live in, where, again, to keep on bringing it back to Ukraine, because I think there is the connection from the very beginning. I said with Laura Loomer, like, why is she supporting Ukraine right now? What is the thing that they're going to see in Ukraine that they would also resonate with, that would also be a part of how they see America?
The average MAGA voter, to what degree, they're all different on different whatever, but in my opinion, they're just racist, misogynistic, and homophobic. And they just don't like anyone who is different than them. They identify a certain way, whether it's their orientation or, their ethnic background or whatever. And they just don't want to talk to or associate, live next to, be around anyone different from them because it makes them feel insecure, makes them feel afraid. They heard some story on the news and they think something bad is going to happen to them or their family. It's a delusional paranoia when violent crime in the United States has been dropping consistently year after year for like 30 or 40 years. Like, the streets of America have never been safer, statistically, per capita, than they are today.
I don't want to be taking the subway in New York City, though. I know New York City's not America. I get that.
Well, you definitely did not want to take the subway in the 1980s then, when the murder rate was precipitously higher.
Exactly.
So the fact that it's never an acknowledgement of progress being made. Yeah. MAGA will never acknowledge that progress is being made in our civil society, which drives me absolutely nuts.
Progress can be made, like with Giuliani, when there were all these arrests that were going on. There was the broken windows policy, and all of that stuff back then. So
correlation does not indicate, causation. What's that book, Freakonomics, in which the argument was made that as soon as Roe v. Wade was passed and abortion was legalized, millions of unwanted children were not born and they did not grow up in the 1990s to become violent criminals. People who are younger, teenagers in their 20s, they're more likely to commit violent crimes than not. So that's a radical theory. I maybe people have forgotten about the book Freakonomics. It was kind of a controversy when it came out. You brought up Giuliani and the broken windows policy. Giuliani just happened to be mayor when the violent crime rate across the United States dropped. Did his policies help? Sure. But were they the cause? No.
Giuliani was good. After him, we had Bloomberg, also good. With de Blasio, things started to go downhill. I mean, I lived in New York. I lived in Manhattan. Like, you're talking about this stuff as somebody who is not from New York, who did not live in New York. I experienced it, and I've experienced the decline that's currently been going on. There's been a lot of these issues with people being pushed into the train. What do you call it? Like the rails where the train is. And as far as what exactly could be done with people who are of that nature, I believe that the law is very important. The law should be followed. The police should enforce the law. The police should arrest people who are doing bad things to people, right? And what I'm really concerned about is that there's more of an emphasis within, let's say, maybe I don't want to speak for your entire circle here, but there may be more of an emphasis when people talk about free economics and things like that to think more about, well, what about the injustice against the criminal? If, for example, maybe they were brought up in a bad way, maybe things could be done differently in terms of how they were brought up. Maybe they should have been given more love, maybe more tolerance. And again, this may not be your opinion, but this is like people who have talked about free economics. They tend to have that kind of look at people.
The evidence is overwhelming that poverty causes violent crime. If you do not like violent crime, you should reduce poverty. But people on the right, people who identify as conservative, they never want to reduce poverty because that involves taxation or government action, which they oppose in every case. It just doesn't work.
But they would be seeing it as being
bringing back the death penalty, bringing back firing squads, trying to harm or hurt or scare or punish people does not reduce crime. People in the heat of the moment, it's a crime of passion or whatever. They don't think, oh, is it a life sentence or am I going to get the electric chair? I guess I won't do this, if it's just a life sentence rather than the electric chair. Like, conservatives always want to go back to the fire and brimstone and punishment and fear, and it doesn't reduce crime.
But do you think it's because
reducing poverty? When you have people who feel like they're included in society, where they belong, where they have opportunity, they don't commit crimes. They want to live within a good society. So I support government policy that reduces poverty and makes a society that has more fair practices where people feel like they have opportunity, and
psychologically
they don't have to rob each other.
No, but psychologically, it's the same thing, at least how you're talking about it, as with Islam, where you're saying what you would do if you were in their place. My other concern here is that when we're talking about the perpetrators and how maybe a different kind of life would have made them not do these horrible acts, you're focusing a lot on taking care of the lives of the perpetrators, not so much the victims. And this is something that I find to be a little bit strange. That
anyone who commits a crime should be held accountable for their crimes, and the victims should receive compensation. Why would they not?
Even saying it in that kind of clinical way, like, I think what drives a lot of people crazy who are more on the right, when they're looking at, for example, that guy who was almost beheaded in Europe by the migrant, when they're looking at Irina Zarukhaya, who was, she's a Ukrainian girl on the train who was murdered by an absolute monster. And the fact that we have judges saying, well, he's not mentally competent, you can understand how that would make certain people's blood boil and make them see that the people who are advocating...
Would a mentally competent person stab a random woman on a bus 5 times? Like that's not normal. Why would any normal person do that? Like, he didn't know her. There was nothing to gain by shoving a knife into her chest. So obviously, yes, he is mentally ill. I'm not saying he should ever be released on the streets again, but obviously there are broken people in our society, and nobody is looking after them. Nobody is taking care of them. And if you don't have a government that has programs or policies to help or watch these people, then yes, they're going to just stab random people on the bus. That is the end result of the society we built, and I want to change it. I'd love to change it if we could.
But your approach would be spending a long time trying to create a system that would address all of these inequities in the very beginning of a person's life, which I do agree should be done. But while you're getting to that goal, why not protect the victims from monsters like this by instituting the kind of policies that we had in New York City?
I guess I don't understand what we're not doing that you'd like us to be doing to protect the victims when preventative policies are more cost effective.
Again,
There
I
are
would,
societies that exist in this world. I just spent 2 weeks in South Korea in which there's no violent crime,
yes,
practically statistically zero.
yes.
But it's the culture, but the culture has been shaped by the laws and the policies of the government. There are no failing schools in South Korea. They have like a 99% literacy rate and high school graduation rate.
Hmm.
So everybody is included, everybody is supported, everybody has the basics. Obviously there's still inequity. There are still children that have advantages, but you try to reduce them so that you don't
Yeah, but it's not
have
a magical government system. It's the people themselves. It's the family. It's how people mirror each other on a daily basis, starting from all the way when they were like 4 years old. What you're talking about, ideally, it should work. The kind of system where a young kid from the hood who has a single mother and no father figure, where they would be able to get the kind of support that would allow them to have a fruitful life. I completely agree with you there. The
it's
only
so much cheaper. It's so much cheaper to have policies and services for that single mom in the inner city where the dad is out in jail or out of the picture, so that child feels like he's American and he
okay,
feels included.
but
That
while we're
whatever you're spending to
yeah.
help that teenage kid, it's cheaper than incarcerating them in prison for 40 years, which is the current system we have now. One of the
But
highest incarceration
while we're
rates in the
getting
entire
while
world.
we're getting to that point, I would be a lot more watchful in terms of making sure that old people or like Hasidic people that are walking the streets of Brooklyn don't get knocked out by some thug in the knockout game. Okay, my focus would be on making sure that the vulnerable of our society don't get abused by the criminals who maybe in a few decades with the kind of system we want to see wouldn't become criminals in the first place. But now that they are criminals, I would just, in your head, I would replace them with like the average Russian orc soldier. Think of them as that. Think of them as like the average Russian orc soldier who has lived a horrible existence, whose parents were probably really abusive to him, but now he's out in the war zone of Ukraine. He comes across a family of Ukrainians and he does absolutely horrible things with them. Would you say, well, this poor Russian soul, if only we had a better system in Putin's Russia to prevent all this stuff from happening? It's like, no, okay, that guy deserves a drone right in the middle of his forehead. And I don't think you would disagree with me
I
there.
reject your analogy of a uniformed soldier receiving payment and direct orders to commit war crimes in Ukraine versus some kid who had a rough childhood, wherever, and is now living on the streets in New York City.
And is now beating people up and is now doing
If you commit a
horrible.
crime, you have to go to jail. I'm not. I'm not saying law should not be enforced here.
Yeah, but the problem is that in certain societies, like the New York City of the 1980s, for instance, we had laws, but they weren't enforced, right? Why weren't they enforced?
I'm sorry. What do you mean they weren't enforced? Like criminals weren't being caught, or criminals
Not
were
to
being
that,
caught,
not
and
to
then we
that
said,
great of
"Oh,
an
you get a
extent.
free pass because you had a rough childhood."
It wasn't that. It was that the laws themselves were not being enforced by the cops. I don't know why. The kind of system that we had under Mayor Dinkins, for some reason, it did not allow that many people to get arrested as it should have. Right? I mean, that's not a fantasy. That's actually what happened. You said so yourself. New York City experienced the bad old days. So my whole thing is, I don't want that same kind of mentality. And again, trying to bridge this gap between the West and Ukraine and the opposition to what I see as being like this third world is global South, Russia, Iran. I would also include China in the mix as well. That kind of mentality. The mentality that would go after old people. And look, my grandma had the situation too. When she was walking the streets of Brooklyn in 1994, she was ambushed by, a group of young black teenagers. And that is a horrible thing. And I don't want anybody to
Well, those young
experience.
black teenagers were not immigrants from anywhere. I'm guessing they were born here, and that's just
Yeah.
what happens. It's
Well,
unfortunate.
I
We
wasn't
should do.
saying immigration right now. I'm saying mindset. We got to separate immigration from mindset because
I guess I
I
don't
was
understand what you're advocating that the government should be doing, that
arresting
they're
the
not.
criminals.
Why
I
are
think that
criminals not being arrested? I don't understand.
if we're talking about New York City in the bad old days, they were not arrested to that great of an extent, which you yourself admitted. Right now, under Madmani, I'm not sure how many of them are being arrested. I know that we've had many issues of people who are on the subway being knocked down into the subway tracks. And again, I don't know exactly what it's going to look like a year from now in New York City. More people are moving out. More people don't want to take the subway anymore. And I think that's for a very specific reason where they don't feel safe. Now, maybe you could say, well, that is just fantasy. But like you said yourself, we experienced a very bad New York City, a crime ridden New York City in the 70s, 80s, early 90s. And we
New
don't
New
want that.
York City, New York City is over 10 million people. It's larger than the population of Belarus, and statistically, violent crime is down. It's gone down every year for 30 or 40 years. Crime has never been lower than it is today on record. So, I mean, you
Do
can
you
keep
agree with,
mentioning individual stories, but
yeah.
I don't understand what policy you're advocating for. You keep saying criminals are not being arrested, and I'm saying, okay, why are they not being arrested? Like, I don't
I can
understand.
give you an example from the program that I was doing with Jason Giorgiani back in New York City. We were talking about how the commissioner of the NYPD, what's her name, Jessica Tisch, right? She, from what I understand, was demoted as far as how much responsibility she has, to the same extent as like the sanitation manager or something like that. So, as far as whether or not people are being arrested to that great of an extent, even if we disagree, which is fine, we can agree to disagree, even if we disagree how bad it's gotten in a place like New York City, if we're talking about what kind of world we want to avoid, it would require going back to like, how would a MAGA person function without dictatorship in their brains, right? It would require enforcing the border. It would require respect for the laws, making sure the criminals are persecuted. It would also require maybe being a bit more stringent on the criminals so that first you're focusing much more on the victims as opposed to the people who committed the crime, where maybe there's going to be less of these activist judges that would release criminals prematurely. I think that is more of the sense that I'm getting from the MAGA people, where all these things don't require a dictator, but they do require a certain cultural change. And I think that when they look at something like Ukraine versus Russia, they would resonate a lot more with something that is Western as opposed to Russia, which they do see as being a lot more thuggish. You know what I mean? Like they see the Russians as being
This is like a
unruly.
Fox. This is like a Fox News narrative. Like the streets of Washington D.C. are not safe. The streets of New York City are not safe. If you go there, you're going to get mugged. But that doesn't happen in St. Petersburg. That doesn't happen in Moscow. These are very clean and safe cities. One, I think all statistical comparisons are either ignored or irrelevant, because I don't think proper crime statistics are kept in authoritarian societies. But yes, the reason why there's no violent crime potentially on the streets of St. Petersburg or Moscow, aside from people flying out windows all the time or being poisoned by tea, is because the police use brutality. The police, rather than arresting someone, charging them, reading them their Miranda rights, and then having them have legal protections, they just take them to the local precinct and torture them. They hook them up to a battery and they electrocute them. We could do that here in the United States. We could make people who live in poverty in so much fear of the police, they never call them. And if they see them, they just run away from them. That's not the society I want to live in. To achieve zero crime on the streets. Yeah, there are. I imagine there's zero violent crime on the streets of Pyongyang or in Beijing, but you have no rights, you have no protections, and if the police pick you up, The police can rob you, they can rape you, they can make you disappear forever, and your government's not going to care. I don't want to live in that society. I would prefer the society we do live in, and I'm sorry, there's just going to be occasional violent crime. It's just the
I
end
agree
result.
with you, but not for the reason you think. If we're talking about Russia, I agree with you that this impression that people like Tucker Carlson, for instance, have had of Russia as being this traditionalist place where crime is prevented by the police, that's complete BS. Where we would disagree goes back to what I said earlier about Islam and Russia, where the Muslims, the Chechens, they're able to get away with all kinds of horrible crimes because the Russian state protects them. And I see the same thing in places in Europe when it comes to these Islamic gangs of thugs. It's the protection out of European guilt for the Rousseauian noble savage.
I think that narrative is BS. The fact that the Muslim population of the UK is 8%, and anyone would think that Keir Starmer or any political party would choose the 8% over the other 90%, there's just no logical connection there. Like, why would the UK be taken over by Islam and politicians are bowing down and allowing rape gangs to run wild? Like, this narrative is nonsensical to me.
Why would Columbia University surrender itself to the thugs who are part and parcel of the IRGC that were taking it over during the summertime and well, it wasn't the summertime, was it? It was during when school was in session. But anyway, why would our valued institutions of learning surrender themselves to this anti-Semitic Islamophilic Hamas?
I highly doubt that a university surrendered itself to a group of students. More likely, the group of students were just exercising their free speech rights. Once again, I don't.
The same group of students, no different than the ones who were Maoists and Stalinists back during the early 20th century.
You're proving my point in that, yeah, we had Stalinist and Maoist ideology college students, and
we had
they
Black
lost.
Panthers who
they lost,
assassinated a judge.
Ideologies rise and fall, and you don't need the government to crush them for them to fade away.
Nobody faded away. They're in these institutions today. They're the ones that allow for globalize the Antifada and all this bullshit to take its due course. I don't see them fading away at all, man. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. And the problem here is that you're asking, why would Keir Starmer and other British politicians support the, radical third worldist global South Muslims as opposed to the British people? For the exact same reason why you had intellectuals in the 1940s supporting Joseph Stalin. Just because you're educated in no way means you're smart. I think we have a lot of really stupid people that have degrees, that went to college, and I think that those people have a complex. Maybe they feel like they want to be a hero, and that's why they feel that they should support the people who, in their minds, because of Soviet Union propaganda all the way back in the 60s and 70s, infected their minds thinking that we're the oppressors, the West, the imperialistic West are the bad guys. Meanwhile, all of these plucky global South people, they're the real victims here, and we should, compensate for our white privilege by, making sure that whatever happens, nobody will ever think we're racist. Nobody will ever think we're bigoted. You don't think that's a powerful thing? You don't think that's a motivational factor for people who are within the elite of our society? That's opium. That's like a drug.
I think the people that you're focused on are irrelevant, and they have no real influence outside of their universities or maybe even New York City. I don't think, AOC is not the Democratic Party. She doesn't represent, like, if you search hard enough, you're going to find crazy, stupid people. And yeah, you're right. There's lots of highly educated people in university positions that have crazy ideas, but that's their job. Like, their job is to have crazy ideas because some of them are good. Yeah, over America's history, going back 240 years or whatever, we've had academics and scholars and elites at Harvard, Yale, and Princeton that preached radical ideas like abolition and desegregation and feminism and ending child labor. All of the progress that is achieved in human society was from people who sat around and had big ideas, and they weren't all good, but the bad ones you forget about. I'm sure in the 1830s, there were crazy college professors with stupid ideas just advocating nonsense, but history forgets them. It's the good ones that rise to the surface and then change our culture and society. So you're focused on crazy professors at Columbia or whatever. I don't really know about them because they're truly irrelevant. Like, I don't spend my time thinking about following, whatever Columbia University is doing because it's just one college that, people are going to advocate weird ideas
You're
everywhere.
forgetting about TikTok. The Chinese government created TikTok,
Well,
where
MAGA
you have
owns TikTok now. TikTok was forced to sell. I mean, Congress banned TikTok. There was no legal authority for Trump to extend, this grace period. Like, TikTok legally was banned by Congress. This was a
Mhm.
bipartisan issue, but Trump found a way to get one of his allies to buy it, and it's now a pro-Israeli propaganda platform that censors people who don't conform to MAGA ideology. So anybody on TikTok should get off.
I wasn't really seeing a lot of pro-Israel stuff. In fact, one of the most comfortable positions for a person to be in my opinion, like the safest thing to say today is that Israel is evil and genocidal and all of that stuff. And from what I understand, that's still going on TikTok. And a lot of the young people today, they were influenced into this third worldist ideology, which is no different than the kind of ideology that people like Alexander Dugin talk about, on the Russian side. They've been influenced by the TikTok.
Do you think
So if
that's
we're
weird
talking about,
that,
yeah,
a vertical short platform can have more influence on people than their family and friends from their entire
absolutely.
lives? If they are truly being indoctrinated or brainwashed by vertical shorts, well, one, our society is in a lot of trouble, but
Yes.
two, two, I just think it's a phase. Like, I think college kids get into these college environments and they're looking to be anti-establishments. They're looking to be rebellious. So whatever is the trend or the authority or power at the time, it's just instinctive for teenagers and people in their early 20s to go against the stream, against the flow. And if that means, Israel is the shadow puppet master of our governments, so I'm going to support the people they're oppressing. Okay, okay, you can think that. You can march or, do sit-ins or take over administrative buildings, whatever. You're not going to change anything. You're not going to change the elections. You're not going to change the fate of nations by making vertical contents. So I'm not going to elevate what you're describing as being this pressing issue that needs to be resolved because I don't care. I don't honestly pay attention to it because I don't think it's having an impact one way or the other.
I don't know. I think that it is having a bit of impact when it comes to people who are more on the MAGA side, who have embraced this anti-Semitic, anti-Israel thing, where now people like Laura Loomer are going against them, but now they may be finding common ground, like I said before, with people like Mamdani and AOC and people of that, Rashida Tlaib or Ilan Omar. There does seem to be a gathering of these kind of people who have grown up watching all this slop on TikTok. And as far as whether that changes policy or not, if we're talking about after Trump, we have other politicians in the future. What are the kind of mentality? What's the kind of mentality that the people that are going to be voting for these politicians are going to have when it comes to how they see the world? Now, you may say that, oh, this is a phase, they're being rebellious, but as far as what is the actual culture that they're absorbing otherwise, I don't think America right now, other than Trump and MAGA and that kind of a thing, I don't think there is, unfortunately, and I say this with a lot of regret, I don't think there is the same kind of galvanizing force of civic nationalism that you would see in Ukraine, for instance. which again, this is why I was talking before about this connection between MAGA and Ukraine, that Ukrainians are nationalists. They don't see nationalism as being a dirty word. And I think that there are people here in the United States who are, not big fans of MAGA, that see nationalism as being a dirty word and would attribute to nationalism all of these oppressive things. I don't think nationalism is oppressive for Ukrainians.
I actually think you make a really good point. And I don't think Ukrainians probably were very nationalistic prior to 10 or 11 years ago, but they have been. There were nationalist forces in Lviv, supporting Poroshenko. Poroshenko was the pro-war candidate. Zelensky was the anti-war candidate in 2019. But Russia has shown so much brutality and barbarism, and they've weaponized their language. They say anywhere someone is speaking Russian, that person's Russian, therefore Russia belongs there. We should be able to expand our borders to encompass and envelop anybody that speaks Russian or has a Russian passport, which is insane because so many people speak Russian because that's the remnants of the Russian Empire, comparable to the Spanish Empire or the British Empire, all these English-speaking countries, or Arabic, remnants of caliphates from 1,000 years ago. So you're right in that we should have American nationalism, but the only question or debate should be what are our American values? And I just reject meatheads like Pete Hegseth saying America's values are white guys, tough, strong, tough, macho, alpha, white guys. What's happening with the Pentagon right now, where Black and female generals and admirals are being forced into early retirement. They're being passed over for promotions. Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth are only promoting white Christian males. The federal bureaucracy is being purged of anybody with brown, black skin, or women. To go back to, I don't know. I don't even know what mythical era they want us to go back to. The 1950s, the 1920s, the 1880s.
Also, again, this is why I'm focusing on teleology so much, on what exactly is the final end goal here of the kind of society you want to live in. If you forget the color of a person's skin or their origin or whatever, and just focus on their actions, if you were to be steel manning the MAGA view of reality, what kind of life they would want to live in, what would be certain basics that you would be in agreement with them about, as far as, well, this is the kind of world that I would want to see, and this is why. This is why I want to see a world like that.
I mean, the Bill of Rights is pretty effing amazing. Freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion. The right to be protected from unreasonable searches and seizures. We have constitutional protections that we have developed, and that should be American nationalism. That should be our common values. But Donald Trump doesn't respect or believe in any of those.
No, but he believes in that enough. If we just have all the stuff you mentioned right now, is that enough for people to have skin in the game to keep this republic going?
Yes and no. It has been good enough for 250 years. And I'll be honest, the Civil War was a big deal. 800,000 American citizens.
I'm sorry to say, but that's not correct, because then you're saying that the only thing that America had going for it was these particular values you just talked about.
Yes.
But was that all that America was?
Yep. Going back to our founding fathers, that's all we've had is the Constitution.
What about the Aristotelian pagan virtues in terms of how people should consider the good life, in terms of how people should get along with each other, in terms of certain moral virtues that people have? Because what you're saying is no different than the den of drug users, huffing opium and living in this world of tolerance and freedom. Obviously, that's not enough. You need to have certain structures that you could build up upon that create a good life for people to live in, right? As far as what do you choose to do as an embodied human being in this reality? So just saying that, well, we're going to be tolerant and we're going to be free, that's good, but it's not enough. You have to have a certain level of responsibility along with that freedom, right? So then that goes back. to the
But
question of
there
like,
is no consistency to how we live today and how we lived in the 1700s or the 1800s. Culture and values change. They're going to continue changing. They're going to always be evolving. The framework, the skeleton that holds the country up is our common law. It is the rule of law, fair practices, and that all, the root is the Constitution. That's all there is, and that might be disappointing to some people, and they want to, put on some other kind of religion or values or traditions. And I'm sorry, but they're just going to change.
well, look, I
People
reject
living
the religious
today.
argument. Absolutely, I'm with you here. Where I think that, like I said before about the founding fathers, they rejected a lot of this religious superstition, and I don't think America's going into a good direction when it comes to becoming a lot more, I guess you could say Jesus freak like, if that's a good way of going about it. I actually don't like that direction. But what I'm seeing with the founding fathers generation was a rejection of both that as well as a rejection of just this kind of materialistic emptiness, which I'm not a big fan of either, that
So
unfortunately I'm seeing a lot.
so in the event anyone made it this far in the live stream, I'm going to say I'm not anti-Christian. I was born, raised, baptized, and confirmed Lutheran, and I actually believe in what is practiced by most Christian faiths. Charity and compassion and forgiveness. And I'm sorry, but there's just nothing. I don't see any of that from MAGA. The only thing that the average young guy who identifies as Christian and MAGA likes about the Bible is that women need to submit to me. Women need to be, they need to know their place and, support me as the man and the head of the family. Like, it's just the thing that the average MAGA man in their 20s, 30s, or 40s likes the most about being Christian is that women should have to submit to them and do what they say, because they think that's the only way they can be in a successful relationship and father children. And that's pretty pathetic. And that's a comes down to a values thing. And I'm sorry, but we're just going extinct. Like, people of the Euro ethnicity are going extinct because we've created societies that are free and open, and women have equal rights and protections and can live their own lives. And they're trying to build relationships with men based on shared values, shared understanding, mutual respect. And there's just a lot of guys that don't want to do that. They look at the global south, they look at places like Iran or Afghanistan, and they say, yeah, that'd be pretty nice if we could get our women to conform like they got them over there. And I reject that. I think that's horrendous. Like, I'm capable of having compassion and empathy for women. And if you actually talk to and listen to them, they would really appreciate it if guys matured a little bit and had better relationships.
That is a good point as far as respect for women, making sure everybody's got equal rights. I couldn't agree with you more on all those fronts. But
So
I
at the
still
UFC fight, shouting Michelle Obama is a man.
I get it. But I still can't help but think that all these things we're talking about as far as tolerance, the Karl Popper quote that my friend put on the screen before about making sure that you're not tolerant of intolerance, you could say, well, the intolerant ones are the MAGA people. But I do wonder if we're talking about the kind of things that the MAGA people are afraid of, like that guy who was a Muslim who was chopping off the head of the gentleman in Northern Ireland. Obviously, they don't want to live in that kind of world. And if there was a hierarchy of bigotry, if MAGA was over here, the guy chopping off the guy's head would be far lower, right? In terms of, how
What
bigoted
about
one has to be
what
to do
about
something
in
like that.
America, all the lone wolf white guys who shoot up theaters and elementary schools and churches? They just
Yeah,
don't
no, it
feel like.
sucks. It's a horrible thing. But again, here's the problem that I have with this particular conversation, because this has come up time and time again when I spoke to people who consider things in a similar way that you do. And again, I really respect the fact that you were able to come here and talk to me about this. I think it's very important to have this kind of dialogue. But what I really don't understand is, if we're talking about us being a house of mirrors, us having, let's say, certain ways that we reflect each other all the way from when we're, like a little kid to when we become adults, and then pass those values on to, the next in line, right? You know that we have different cultures, and those cultures would have certain things inside of them that would either enable people to lean more on being of the head chopping variety or the, female genital mutilation variety, or, whatever horrid thing you want to put into that box, right? And that comes from mirroring the kind of environment you're in. When we're talking about having a balance between freedom and responsibility, a la the founding fathers, the reason why I took issue with when you were talking about that itself being enough is that if we see these cultural problems and we also don't want to become, these bigoted, wife enslaving people, but we also don't want people to chop people's heads off, then we have to have enough of a sense of, we have to have enough logic to make sure we do not bring in people who want to chop people's heads off, and prevent that from occurring by restricting how many people have that same kind of mentality that would enable more of the head chopping off to occur. I don't think that is unreasonable, and that is partly why I was taking issue with it just being about freedom and tolerance. You have to have a certain type of, judgment in order to see how people act. And yes, it's incredibly close to saying, well, first they went after the yada, 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 and then they went after yada, yada, yada. And I said nothing, of course. But life is complicated. And that's why certain things end up going right into that zone of making sure that you're extremely careful with how you handle it. But I don't think the answer is to ignore it and say, well, they'll become Americans in a few generations. It'll be fine. Don't worry about it. I think that's deeply irresponsible.
Sure. Yeah. I understand your position, but I guess I just look at things on a larger time scale. I just think there's some society, like human society, is just chaos. Obviously, we should be doing things to reduce the chaos, but Western values are of inclusion and tolerance and giving people a shot. And I reject the premise of, well, some of these people might be head choppers, therefore we should ban all of them. Because I don't think they're all head choppers. Just being honest. Like,
well, again,
I think
it's weird. It's weird though, because it's a very good line for a clip almost to say what you just said right now. You know what I mean? Like, it's very YouTube centric, TikTok centric, whatever you want to say. You know what I mean? Like, because the way that you say certain things, I can see it being like, this is my line that I'm uttering out right now, where it sounds good, but it's a sales pitch. It's not a conversation. And when we're talking about having a conversation about it, you know what I'm getting at with the whole head chopping thing. I'm talking about a larger culture that has lived in a very barbaric way in certain parts of the world, where these things get passed down to people, how they relate to women, how they relate to people who are not of their particular tribe, let's say, because certain cultures, they're incredibly tribal. It's not even about, like the government. It's more about my kin, against that kin who we have had like this back and forth blood feud with for centuries. You know what I mean? All that kind of tribal bullshit.
I'm just being honest, Lev. Like, as far as mass killings in America, they're almost exclusively committed by people who look like you and me. Younger white guys. These mass killing events, these mass shootings, they're not being done by black and brown people.
Jake, you're not engaging with what I was saying earlier, please. I don't want this to be a sales pitch. I want this to be a legitimate conversation. When we're talking about these hive minds, these cultural contagions, this mirroring.
There's no such thing as a hive mind.
What do you mean there's no such thing as a hive mind?
There's culture. I mean, people
look at the
feel...
Russians. You think the Russians aren't living in a hive mind? When it comes to how they look at Putin, when it comes to how they think Ukrainians are all Nazis, that's not a hive mind? Of course that's a hive mind.
No, I think they're taking the path of least resistance. Like, I don't think the average Russian is jingoist or excited about killing Ukrainians. I think they just have resigned and surrendered, saying, to live my life, to, effing wake up in the morning and eat my eggs and go to work, I need to just stop resisting and accept what the official narrative is from my country. Is that a hive mind where they're like participating or contributing to the decisions being made? No, They're being acted upon, and they have submitted. I don't really view that as a hive mind.
I
Now
completely
they're
disagree.
guilty if they participate in hostilities, and they should die. But I'm not viewing them as some kind of collective hive mind like the Borg, where they're just trying to, expand and take whatever they can. The
No,
Russian people are
that's exactly
victims.
what they are. I completely disagree. I'll give you an example. There are relatives of like distant relatives that we know who are in Russia, and they were complaining about problems having to do with healthcare, having to do with access to food, medicine, things of that nature. The moment Putin invaded Crimea back in 2014, they completely forgot about all that stuff. They got excited. It's like, yeah, we're finally taking more stuff. We're taking more territory. Go Russia. That is a hive mind. And that is something that we've seen in terms of the people who were brought to the gulags during Stalin's reign of terror. And they still worshiped Stalin like a god. And they thought there is
Does
no way Daddy Stalin would ever do this to us. It's this hive mind of dependence on this big figure that you're attributing to MAGA, but that I'm seeing to be at a much higher
is
level within
MAGA
the
a hive
Russians.
mind? Do you think MAGA is a hive mind?
I do. I think everybody has a certain amount of hive mindness to them. But this is my big problem. When you're talking about white guys who are, like doing horrible things like in their school and things of that nature, we're not talking about the amounts and the degrees and the dangers that certain hive minds pose. And it's like, yes, all of that stuff needs to be addressed. But if we're talking about something that gets passed down from parent to child, that's been going on for thousands of years in parts of the world that I wouldn't really be particularly keen on visiting. I would love to visit South Korea. I would love to visit Japan. And you know why, right? Because their kind of hive mind is one that rejects a lot of this stuff having to do with like beating up women or these various tribal conflicts or beheading the unbelievers, right? They reject all that stuff. They're not about that stuff. So I'm not saying that hive minds are bad, but we have to be aware of what the hive minds are. And then we got to ask ourselves, would we rather have people who are of the more, let's say, liberal in the classic sense hive mind, or we would rather have people who are of the orcish Russian hive mind that get excited whenever Russia goes to invade a new piece of land? Like, which one? There's a difference, right?
I kind of reject that liberals or people on the left are any kind of hive mind, because we all have our own issues and we constantly fight amongst ourselves. I know that people like Ilhan Omar and AOC get all the attention because that's what the right talks about. But like, do you have an opinion about Dina Titus or Susie Lee, the two Democratic congressmen who represent Las Vegas?
I unfortunately have not had the pleasure of knowing that much about them.
Well, there are hundreds of Democrats in Congress that you probably can't recognize by their face, but they represent the majority of liberals, or the majority of people on the left in America. And because Fox News and the right do not talk about them, do not focus on them, do not highlight them, because they're average, relatable people. Like Susie Lee and Dina Titus, the two congresswomen from my city, they're just normal people. They're on the left. They're liberals. They have their issues and
Why are you
policies.
saying liberal and left in the same sentence?
I don't understand the difference. Like when people toss around labels, like I don't understand what
I
I
see
don't
liberal as
conform to
being
those.
antithetical to leftism. Liberalism has nothing to do with leftism.
I honestly don't think people can be clearly just slotted into one position. Like obviously some people can if they're an advocate for the most purest form of some kind of ideology, but the overwhelming majority of Democrats in the country are just people who live normal lives, who don't pay attention to what's happening on the campus of
Sure.
Columbia. Like, I hate that our political discourse and dialogue, when people are on these debate shows, they focus on Ilhan Omar and AOC, and they only talk about Zoran Mandani, when that's, it has nothing to do with the average Democratic voter in the country. Like, 47% of the electorate is being ignored. to talk about and focus on the crazy 1% with the most extreme ideas. And I do not like participating in these kinds of discussions and debates because I don't think they're honest and I don't think they're representative of the average voter in America. And I also think this is exactly what MAGA wants. MAGA wants us to focus on the most extreme people, to paint a broad brush so that you can just discard and ignore all the other democratic liberal politicians in America or whatever.
If there were extremist people who were, let's say again, back in the 60s and 70s, ardent supporters of Soviet Russia, I would see them, if I was alive back then, as like, I don't know, working for Joseph McCarthy or whatever, right? Like, I would consider them to be an extremely dangerous element within the United States. And you're right.
But we had McCarthyism. We generally regret McCarthyism, don't we?
Well, it depends on who you ask. I mean, he was able to figure out a lot of people that were working for the FDR administration who were agents of Soviet Russia. So that's not good. It's not good to have people like that in the United States government, right? It's good that we got rid of them.
Wouldn't you say that a lot of innocent people had their lives ruined?
Again, as somebody who was born in Soviet Russia, I was still, I was still in the womb coming out of it when, Soviet Russia existed, the Soviet Union existed. I don't really care that much about useful idiots who think that Maoism or Stalinism or Leninism or whatever is going to create a paradise on earth. Because I'll give you another example. In Iran, you had these useful idiots, these leftists who were professors, who were, galvanizing the youth back then to bring in the Ayatollah Khomeini. And back then, I'm sure there were people who said, well, they should have a voice too, and why are you persecuting them? Meanwhile, you had Mossad that was telling the Shah, we'll get this guy for you. We'll kill him. We'll assassinate the Ayatollah Khomeini. Just give us the word. And unfortunately, he didn't do it. And that, I think, is an incredible tragedy. And I say that because I actually care about the lives of these poor young people that right now have, and partly you could say this is also Trump saying like, oh, go out into the streets, yada, yada, yada. So by no means am I excusing Donald Trump's actions here at all. But if we're talking about these young people who are risking their lives and who have died for the sake of this kind of freedom, it was against these same useful idiot leftists that were around during the McCarthy era, who were working with Soviet Russia.
I don't think you're describing a common ideology shared by, the leftists that brought the Ayatollah to power and then people at Columbia University. You're describing human nature. You're describing young people who rebel against authority. There is no connection here aside from people are people, and people in their teens and 20s tend to experiment with new ideas and new ideologies. And yeah, they can be consumed by them. They can become passionate about them. But usually when people get older, they kind of mellow out. Most people.
Look at the IRGC heads. They're still around and they're pretty old. And I wouldn't say they mellowed out at all.
They like their perks and privileges, and you can only maintain your perks and privileges by brute force, through violence. That's the connection.
Which these young, useful idiots brought about in the first place. So maybe you think that I should have, more of a heart when it comes to these young people because, what do they know? And that's fine. But at the same time, I don't want them and TikTok and the third world is bullshit. I don't want that to infect the United States. And I don't think you do either. I don't think anybody with a sensible head on their shoulders wants that kind of toxic ideology to take charge. So again, bringing it back.
I think it's a virtually irrelevant percent of the population that has been taken in by that. I just like if I were to walk the streets of Las Vegas and talk to random individuals, I don't think I would find a single person that would be like, yeah, river to the sea, blah, blah, blah. Like, these are very isolated pockets of people. You being in New York City, I think you experience them much more than the average American
because
does.
I live in New York City, right?
Correct.
But here's the difference. I'm sorry to say, But the people you're talking about, the average Joes in Las Vegas, they don't have their hands on the levers of our culture as much as the people who go to these prestigious universities, just like the ones that went to those universities back during Stalin's time, who got influenced by the KGB agents into embracing Stalinism. That's where I see this horseshoe becoming a ring, where the people you're against, the Russian government, are actively working to radicalize both the far left and the far right in this country. And these are people who, there may not be that much of them in comparison to the people you're engaged with just walking around, going to Walmart or whatever. But at the same time, they are important because they are the children of the elites. They are people who have money. They are people who have influence. And just like it was during the time of World War II, when you had people in FDR's administration who were active agents of the USSR, this is a big fear that I have when it comes to Russia infecting not just the people who are within MAGA, because I'm sure there are people who are within MAGA that do have connections to the Russian government that want Russia to succeed and all that horrible stuff. Just as well, I'm sure that there are people on the far left who are also connected to Russia. I'll give you a quick example, and we're going to be wrapping it up shortly, but a quick example in relation to Ukraine and Russia with Germany. You had Angela Merkel, who was the head of her Stasi organization in her school, and she was like a very active participant within this whole Stasi structure. And then you had, I don't remember his name right now, but he was the head of Nord Stream. He was a former Stasi head official. And this is the guy who was in charge of Nord Stream. And when you think about the connections between those elements in Eastern Germany and Russia's government, Putin himself, being in Germany for quite a long time, this is a kind of connection that I think yields a long-term association and friendship and coordination when it comes to what these kind of elements who are associated with the Russian government can do to Germany and Europe. I don't want the same thing to happen to the United States. I don't want there to be the case where we have people who are on the side of MAGA who get influenced by Russian money and all of a sudden, drop support for Ukraine. You don't want that either, but I don't want that to be happening on the left. And like I said before, the far left and the far right, they're embracing the very same global south, third worldist talking points when it comes to being against Western civilization and being for this Rousseauian noble savage ideal that they're seeing in a lot of these Muslims and other denizens of the third world. And that's what they have in common with the Free Palestine people. And the sooner that it becomes obvious that these people have their hands on the levers of power, there may not be a lot of them, but they have their hands on the levers of power, the more I hope that we can come up with a solution to this problem, because the people that are going to solve it are not going to be as nice as you and me. You know what I'm saying?
I truly believe the people you're describing are irrelevant. And we have a scoreboard. We now have a public scoreboard to determine how relevant any or all of these people are, and it's views. It's views on social media. And I don't like who are these ultra leftists that have millions of subscribers and are getting millions of views.
Piker?
Yeah, I don't really like that guy, but you're right. Actually, yeah, I'm going to join you and say F that guy because he says positive things about Putin's Russia and has nothing to say positive about Ukraine. So yeah, I guess, yeah, that's a good example. I don't care for that guy, but I also don't really focus on him. I don't think about him much day to day. So
yeah, but the problem is that a lot of young people do. Hassan Piker is unfortunately, an extremely popular live stream guy. He has millions of subscribers.
Here's the thing about Hassan Piker, and I think this is truly stupid, but I think a lot of people like him because he kind of looks tough. He probably does work out. And I just know on social media that if you have a, domineering or imposing stature, or that's not true either. It's so complicated to try and guess why is somebody popular on social media. I'm a full-time YouTuber. I think about this all the time. And yeah, I can't figure out the allure. I've watched clips from Hassan Piker's show and I never, on even issues that I agree with him on. Like I never feel like I'm being really informed that much, and his personality and takes aren't that interesting. So
Shouldn't that
m-
scare you? Shouldn't that scare you that you're
no,
not see? No, no, hold on. You don't know what I'm about to say. Shouldn't it scare you, Jake Bro, that you're trying to figure out why do I not resonate with what this person has to say while before we were talking about how, well, obviously people are going to embrace American values because I embrace American values. But over here, you have a great example of people who you have no idea why they like this guy, yet they do. And that should set up certain alarms when it comes to whether or not
nah,
we're going to
nah.
have this kind of Western
In
civilization.
influencers rise and fall. I've only been doing YouTube for 7 years, and I've already seen the rise and fall of influencers. People who have millions of followers, and they'll release new videos, and they barely break 50,000 views because their audience is just gone. They've moved on, and this can be a reflection of the content creator. They changed. They lost their magic. They
Mhm.
lost their origin story that got people hooked in the first place. So yeah, I think Hassan Piker is experiencing a wave of popularity, but he can easily be supplanted. He can easily be replaced by somebody else. And I think there's something coming. There has to be a counterforce on social media to what MAGA is. And you're sort of seeing the rumblings or beginnings of it. But I think it's going to really focus coming into the next 6 months through the midterms. And then the next presidential cycle is going to be absolutely insane, but we need something on the left. We need a liberal cultural force. And that's what Donald Trump is. Like he sells this tough guy 1980s action movie hero image that a lot of people vibe with and enjoy. And Obama had it. Obama in 2008, predating most people being on a social media platform, hope, change. He gave really good speeches. He looked cool. He played basketball. That's what people want. Like people care more about personalities and do I like this person than they really do on policy. The fact that Donald Trump can get conservatives to abandon free trade and abandon protecting democracy around the world and convince them that a war with Iran was a good idea and we no longer have to care about soaring budgets and deficits. Like it proves that most people don't care about policy. They care about personality. And if they like you, they'll follow you or they'll support you. And I think something's coming for the Democratic nominee in 2028. I don't think it's going to be Gavin Newsom. I don't think it's going to be Pete Buttigieg or any of these other uh, classical politicians. It's going to be something new. And I don't think America's ready for it, but I'm excited for it. I hope it's a
You don't
positive.
think that it's going to be more in the bucket of the Queers for Palestine thing, more along the lines of embracing the mentality of seeing all the people in the global south as victims and all of the white Western people as oppressors? You don't think it's going to be more of that kind of identity politics?
I mean, that voice and that perspective will always be there. But once again, I just think for the average person who voted for Kamala Harris, I mean, less than 10% of people care or, you know, I think the average Democratic voter says, okay, we live in a free and fair society. I think LGBT people should have protections and should be included in our society. But it's not like what they wake up and think about during the daytime. Like people care about their budgets, they care about their job, their own economic prospects, and a better future for their kids and grandkids. And I just think that's been lost on the internet debates when we focus on the extremes and the most crazy people, because that's what these crazy people want. They want you talking about them. They want to say the most extreme, crazy, batshit stuff. So they go
Mhm.
viral, they get clicks, they get views, and they gain acolytes. They gain people that become obsessed with them and then try to parrot what they say and do. And it's intoxicating. Lev, I don't know what your best performing video is, but when you get a YouTube video that gets 1 million views, it's just really weird. Like the world that I've entered, I never sought this out. It's not my primary focus. Like there's a lot more I could be doing to embrace, this parasocial relationship that I've formed with hundreds of thousands of people. I hate it. I don't
Do,
want
do
it.
you
But
feel like you're constantly having to perform?
yes and no. I don't do a lot of vertical shorts. I don't make like Instagram stories. Like I don't feel like I need to share my personal life with my audience. So in my videos, I'm just trying to stick to the facts. I'll be honest with you, Lev. I make propaganda. I make pro-Ukraine, anti-Russian propaganda because I think that's what's needed to counter what Russia is doing. I make my social media posts to be provocative or attention grabbing because that's what goes viral on social media. I believe in Ukraine. I believe Russia is an existential threat to the United States that should be addressed. But I also think I should speak in the common language of the internet, and that is the most effective way to advocate for your policies and positions that you care about. I want to be a good person. I want to live in a good world. That's just the person I am on camera, and thankfully, a lot of people have found me and they've connected with me. But do I perform or do I pretend to be anything I'm not? And no, I don't, because I don't see a benefit. I don't care. Like if people stopped watching me, I would just go back to having a normal life that I had prior to being successful on YouTube. And I truly don't think it would bother me one way or the other.
It's really weird because I'm just trying to imagine, like, imagine the two of us sitting down at a bar somewhere and talking. Do you think it would be different than how we're talking right now?
No,
Because it gives,
we would have
yeah,
had the exact same conversation. I will say that I speak like a YouTuber now because I have been doing this on cameras for so
yeah.
long.
Well, this is what I noticed. Like when you say certain things, it doesn't feel like we're talking. It feels more like you're saying this to the audience. But like I understand, like it may happen sometimes, just when you get used to something. But it almost creates this kind of shield where I wonder if we're understanding each other or not. Or whether this is just about, well, I'm going to try to give my points and you're going to try to give your points, and then the audience, let them decide who who they think is right. But it's almost like I wish there was some kind of a crack in this shield that's between the two of us so that you could understand a little bit more about what I'm talking about here.
I don't want to show you any disrespect, but I'll be honest, like I'm pretty fixed in what I think and believe. Obviously, I don't have an opinion on everything. That's impossible. You're going to present situations or evidence to me that I've never thought about, and I'll have to think about it in that moment and try and come up with a consistent belief with my existing beliefs. But I like who I am. I am a happy person. And unfortunately, in this world, that is a very rare thing. There's a lot of people, probably the majority of Americans, who are miserable. They're living lives in which they are unhappy. And when I actually try and think about what their daily life is like, being an unhappy person, they hate their job, they're unhappy with their partner, their kids are little shits, their neighbors, make noise in the evening and it's driving them crazy. Like the average person, human being is living in abject misery. Maybe it's obesity, maybe it's, nicotine addiction or drugs. So I feel so incredibly grateful for the life I've had. I've had so many opportunities and I've experienced so much success, both living and working abroad in the Air Force, now on YouTube. I had a fantastic college experience, lots of great family and friends. I think that I'm doing life correctly. And I understand, everyone has main character syndrome and they think that the decisions they've made for themselves, most people
I mean,
are grateful
that's
about
the
them.
kind of criticism that people on the right, I noticed, have had towards people on the left, where they see it as being like a theater. You ever heard of like theater kids, that kind of thing, right?
Sure.
Yeah, the main character syndrome, and also the use of the word folks. Not that you say the word folks. I haven't noticed you saying the word folks, but there's just some kind of things that would make for wanting certain things to be torn down and for there to be like a real recognition of like, what exactly am I talking about here? Because it feels like we're very close. I mean, obviously we both agree on Ukraine 100%, that Ukraine has to win against Russia. There is no doubt about that. It just feels like, I don't even know how to say it. It just feels like uh, the idea that you are bound to what you believe right now as something that's permanent. It's like, why? That doesn't define you as a human being. What defines us as human beings is our willingness to be curious and to second guess ourselves. And in a way, that's like, if I had a way I could define what Western civilization was, it would be the tendency of being able to look outside of yourself and recognize certain patterns that you may be in, and then attempt to find some kind of an objective reality. Because again, like with the MAGA stuff, once you get rid of the dictatorship and a lot of these things that you don't like,
you can't still have MAGA without the dictatorship shit. Like, it's entirely based on authoritarianism.
okay, forget MAGA. If we're talking about wanting there to be rule of law, a secure border, right? Both of those things, no problem yet, right? If we have both of those things, I don't care about policies. Don't say anything about policies right now. Just those two things: secure border, rule of law, punishing the criminals, right? Just those two things by themselves. Those would be good ends. That would be a good teleology for those two things. Yes. So, at least in my experience, a lot of the people who are within the MAGA sphere, those are the two things that they're very worried about. And I'm not going to go on the monologuing again, as I've done throughout this entire amazing broadcast.
I understand the appeal. A lot of people who are not thrilled with Trump's personality and antics, they say I have to support him because I'm not seeing what the alternative is. And, we could go down the rabbit hole of why would Joe Biden allow in people to the country? You do see the videos. There's an economic argument. I don't want to make it. It's kind of pointless. Kind of getting hungry here, Lev. We should probably wrap it up. But I do appreciate the conversation. Obviously, you're an intellectual. I'm also an intellectual. I love having these kinds of debates. This is what I did in university with my friends. So it is fun to have these conversations. But yeah, I mean, at the end, I lived my life experience. You lived your life experience. And hopefully you're a happy person who doesn't live life with a lot of regrets. And your values and beliefs have served you well, hopefully. And they've served me well. And we're just not going to agree. But I'm not out to get you or anyone who disagrees with me on certain issues. So
no, for now. And again, I appreciate the conversation. I think we went to a lot of very interesting areas. Last thing I would say is that you have a good moral code about yourself, how you want to live your life. I recognize that. I mean, probably being in the Air Force, even though I don't know exactly how all that went down for yourself, but I imagine that's something that instilled a kind of discipline inside of you, kind of moral compass for you to follow. I hope more people will have the same moral compass. Where we may disagree, at least for now, is that I doubt a lot of people who come from completely different cultures would have the same mentality that you would when it comes to these things. And in terms of us not being like Russia, because I got away from Russia, I don't want places in the world to be like Russia. I want to find what are the kind of ways that people behave that are close to the thing that me and other people who escaped from Russia, had as evidence of the need to escape from Russia in the first place. When they saw that people act a certain way, they don't want to be involved with people like that. So they want to go somewhere where they see a bright light at the end of the tunnel. And America, for me, has been that bright light. And I want more of those kind of bright lights to exist in the world, which is why I'm very much in support of Ukraine as being a bright light of resistance to the same mentality that we're seeing both from Russia and from the migrants that Russia's been weaponizing into Europe. Because I know we may disagree here, but I really don't see a difference in terms of the mentality of somebody from, I don't know, Mogadishu or whatever, who is running around the street with an axe, and the enlisted Russian orc soldier who's out to steal a washing machine from a Ukrainian household, after he's done the unspeakable. To me, both of those examples are things that I want to avoid. And by no means is that any kind of guarantee in terms of, I don't know, like the color of your skin or whatever. None of that matters to me. What matters is culture and the kind of memetics that we end up passing on to our kids and to the people around our community when we mirror each other. And I hope more people, Jake, can mirror the kind of moral compass that you set up for yourself.
I appreciate that, Lev. Civilizations are always a clash of cultures. I don't think you can end the conflict. I mean, obviously, it has to be managed, and criminals should be prosecuted. But yeah, we'll see how it all plays out. Human society is going to continue evolving and changing, and I'm going to keep riding the wave.
Uh-oh. I didn't see his message here. I just clicked this because why not? From King of Biltong. I disagree with this. Just so you know. Jake needs Biltong to help increase his testosterone. Nonsense. Jake, you're incredibly a testosterone guy. I disavow this comment. Packed with protein, B vitamins, creatine, and more. BiltongUSA.com. Use code BTR for I believe it's 10% off. Biltong's really good, by the way. I don't know if you ever had it.
No, but if we're talking about health stuff, my number one piece of health advice for everyone is to give up added sugar. Look at the nutrition label of whatever you're eating and drinking. Look at the line that says added sugar, how many grams. If it's greater than 0, give it up. I gave up sugar.
You're not a Ray Peat guy?
Say again?
You're not a Ray Peat guy?
What's that?
So Ray Peat was this, I don't want to go down another rabbit hole, but he was a nutritionist who didn't really look at sugar in the same way that you're talking about. Like, again, I don't know the details here, but for him, it wasn't about sugar. It was more about like how your body handles sugar. So I'm just curious, like, why does Ray Peat like sugar? And yes, I'm using AI because I don't remember exactly how it happened, but real quick,
everybody, this is Lev Polyakov of Break.
So I wanted to quickly share this with you, Jake, before we go. This is a trailer for a debate that I'm going to be unleashing upon the world in a week that I had with Curtis Yarvin. You know Curtis Yarvin, right?
Can you remind me?
So he is he's a neo-reactionary guy, thinker. He's very influential on people like J.D. Vance, for instance.
Shoot. Yeah, I know who that guy is. You're right.
Yes. But you look very depressed. But he had a very good debate versus John E. Erbst, who is the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and to Uzbekistan as well. And he heads the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. And this is a real quick trailer. Just want to share this with you.
Hey, everybody. This is Lev Polyakov of Break the Rules in Washington, D.C. After the security briefing, America's Enemies, the Russian Reality. I hosted an amazing debate with neo-reactionary thinker Curtis Yarvin and John Erbst, who is the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and head of the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. This is a fiery but peaceful debate, and I encourage you guys to make up your own mind about who you think is right. Should America help Ukraine out in this invasion by Russia? And what are the consequences if it does not?
I would like to propose a different boundary, a red line in the sand, if you will, beyond which, I think we should become very concerned if Putin goes. And for me, that's the English Channel. A congressman said something very, courageous in a way. He's like, there's no axis of evil. The alliance between Russia, China, Iran is an alliance of convenience, and these countries don't really have a plan, a common plan. I would say the same with the Axis in World War II, actually.
Well, I think the lesson of history is clear, and I think you've already given away your game. If you don't think Hitler was a serious danger to American national security, and you kind of just suggested that, I say kind of, because he was a little bit more nuanced than that. But if you think that American security rests on the English Channel, then you're willing to consider whether it's Russian or German hegemony in Europe.
Yeah.
If you think that allowing a power to control all of Europe, a hostile power, and Hitler was certainly a hostile power for us. The Soviet Union was certainly a hostile power for us, and Putin's Russia is a hostile power for us. They consider us to be their principal enemy, and they behave in that fashion.
Do we behave in that fashion?
I think that we have demonstrated insufficient prudence in the use of American military force.
What do you think?
Looks good. Yeah, that's a good trailer.
Yeah.
Hope it does well, Lev.
And just a quick note about that event is that Curtis Yarvin went there, and I wouldn't really say that Curtis was convinced necessarily, at least for now, of what was talked about. But we also had other people who were from MAGA, who were more conservative, who were there, who listened to the people at the conference, and from the people that I spoke with, they started to be convinced. They started to be convinced of the importance of supporting Ukraine, but mostly it was for the reasons that you're rejecting. And this is we're not going to get into it right now, but that's just so you understand, just like a more, let's say, further away type view at this situation right now. They're looking at Ukraine as being part of Western civilization, and they're embracing it, and they're against leftism, and they're against third worldism, and that's where they are. And I think that if we are going to support Ukraine in any way, these arguments have to be considered. But anyway, Ray Peat, he was a biologist and physiologist, and he favored sugar, specifically simple sugars like sucrose and fructose, because of his bioenergetics framework. In his view, the primary engine of health, longevity, and disease resistance is a high cellular metabolic rate. Rather than viewing sugar as a toxic driver of inflammation, Pete argued that easily digestible sugars, sourced from ripe fruits, fruit juices like orange juice, honey, and dairy, are the ideal protective fruits to keep the metabolic furnace burning hot. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's a bunch of nonsense. The body needs vitamins, minerals, protein, lipids, antioxidants, and fiber. Like these are the 6 things every body needs to be healthy. And added sugar provides nothing, no nutritional value. It's just excess calories that causes inflammation and makes you gain weight, which can lead to a variety of other terrible, lifelong, debilitating diseases. Anyways, about a year ago, I read a book, The Case Against Sugar. I gave up anything that had added sugar, and I have felt superhuman the last year. Like, I've never felt better. I mean, obviously, I still have like birthday cake, and like I'm not like a fanatic here. Like, I still have sugar occasionally, but as far as eliminating it from my breakfast and lunch, especially every day, changed my life forever. And this is my number one piece of advice for anyone. If you want to feel better, give up added sugar.
Well said. That is a debate that I have no horse in right now, but that is to be continued in the future. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Jake, I really appreciate your time here talking with us, even though we didn't agree. I thought that this was a very interesting back and forth. And where could people find you?
Jake Broe on everywhere, almost everywhere.
Sounds good. And if you guys enjoyed the show, make sure to smash that like button, smash, I get parched over here. Smash that subscribe button, click the bell. It's very important for growth. Patreon.com/breaktherules. I'll see you guys next time. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Take care.